You are.
We're live.
All right. Welcome to the Freeborn Podcast. I'm here with my friend, old-time friend, Brent Riggs, former missionary to Mexico. That's where we worked in some of the same places, and then missionary to Poland, and then now a pastor at the Gathering in Jesus' Name. How you doing, Brent? Good to see you.
Well. Good seeing you as well.
How's it been being back in the States now?
A new experience.
Yeah?
Yeah, we were out of the country for 35 years, and being back in America is like crazy.
Yeah.
It's a different world, for sure.
Yeah. How's it going with the work in San Antonio with all that's going on now? And
COVID was a challenge. It's been a challenge, but we're doing better now. People are starting to come back, slow but sure. We're getting visitors coming out, and we're going to start up an evangelism campaign here next week, I hope. And so that was coming back to America and getting your feet on the ground here in the States, and then COVID hitting, so it wasn't normal this past year. So it was a real challenge.
it almost feels like a lost year in some ways.
That would be a good way to say it. Yeah.
and,
both.
And for kids, it's going to be really that way in schools, right? I mean,
grandkids.
Yeah. I think I'm going to, any doctor I ever get, I'm going to ask them what year they graduated. When they took that neurosurgery class.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if it was in 2020, I think I'll pass.
Did you take that online?
Yeah, exactly.
Studying by yourself with no parents at home.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that was crazy. What are you guys going to do with as far as like evangelism? Because we find that people are still a little trepidatious to have someone knocking on their door. Or
Are you talking about because of COVID, or are you talking about generally?
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out. We're going to go back out.
What are you planning on doing?
Well, we got two things that we're planning. I'm going to go back door knocking, but we have a church campaign. We're going to try to do what the New York First Bible Church up there, they call it Operation Jerusalem, where they try to cover all the area around their church, all of Staten Island. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get a big map and do something similar with San Antonio.
Why do they call it Operation Jerusalem?
And that verse in Acts, go from Jerusalem, Samaria, and other parts of the world.
So they're trying to cover their locality.
Cover their little area.
Okay.
And so we'll get a big map, and we'll just start plotting. The ladies have been doing this for years, so similar.
Where they send out letters, though, right? Or what are they doing?
There's two operations. One, there were handwritten letters that were sent out, and then the ladies were out tagging doors. Mm-hmm. Get a little door hanger thing you hang in there, and you put maybe a Gospel of John and a couple tracts in it about the church. Mm-hmm. And we'll do something similar. And we've had visitors out because of it, and so the more you tag, the bigger percentage of people you have coming. So
yeah,
we're going to try it. It gives people that aren't really necessarily outgoing as far as willing to talk with people because they're a little bit anxious, but it gives them an opportunity to evangelize in that way. So
yeah, we just did that this last Sunday. We made some door hangers.
Yep.
And invited out. I only passed out one, and they came to church.
There you go.
So
100%.
That's how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah. There you go.
All those people scurrying around with thousands of them. You just got to know where to put
Just
it.
find the elect, and there you go.
There you go. I could point you to them if you want. Save you some time. Have you done any street preaching since you've been back?
I haven't done it here in San Antonio. I mean, it's a different world. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I know Bill does it downtown. And getting downtown, by the time I get out of work and get downtown, it hasn't been well. But have done some door knocking, got some talks. Surprisingly, I wasn't sure exactly how that was going to go, but people actually every once in a while they do open the doors. So you do get to talk to them. Sometimes through the screen, but you get to talk to them. And it's just a matter of, you knock on enough doors, you'll get somebody.
Yeah.
And the last few years over in Poland, our street preaching typical street preaching, we really got to just talking to people one-on-one. So we weren't getting the crowds that we got in Mexico or even in Warsaw when we were in Warsaw. Mm-hmm. And we just weren't getting the talks. We would preach. I mean, people would listen, obviously. They would walk by and hear us or stop for a moment. But we weren't getting the actual opportunity to talk to people. Mm-hmm. That, in Mexico, the big crowds, and then people have questions. And so we just started asking people, and we'd written up a tract. Have you ever been to a non-Christian, a non-Roman Catholic church? And that was a great question, and it just worked well in Poland. And they were either going to say yes or no, but that was the icebreaker. And then from there, you could explain who you were, and then you got an opportunity to preach the gospel to them. So that's the way we went. And so hopefully we'll get something going like that here as well.
Put that a little closer to you, I think.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So I think the problem here in America is they're glued to their cars. So it's hard to confront them when they're in their car. So you have to find them where they're.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually had someone come in 2 Sundays. We had the first Sunday they came from listening to this podcast, which surprised me because we don't have a lot of viewers. And
One
the
of the
chance
two.
of, yeah,
One of the
exactly.
two.
Apparently there was 4. But, and there's not like we don't advertise or target that. It's just on YouTube. So
Right.
what are the chances that somebody that listens on YouTube is from San Antonio and from our neighborhood?
Yeah.
That's very slim. But yeah,
Well, I told you earlier before the show came on, in our work in Torun, we had lots of visitors that had listened to us online for 2 to 3 years. And then they got enough nerve
What were
to
you
come out
doing
and visit.
online?
They were just recording our Sunday morning sermons.
And then you'd play it like on just on a website or on
Yeah,
YouTube?
we had a website. We had a website, and we uploaded it on the website.
And how would people find that website?
People that were discouraged with Roman Catholicism would be searching for something else, and they would find our website.
So, but how would you like promote it or advertise it, or how
We
did you
didn't.
get?
We just made a page, and
You just had a
a page. And
you just did it ninja style.
yeah, we just put the page up. Had a brother who knew what he was doing, and had him do it, and he would upload all our messages, and they could listen to them.
Would you guys put the website on your tracks or anything? Or
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
We did. So that would help as well. So that would be the advertisement, I
right.
guess.
Okay.
And we did the little, I don't know, the QRC code or thing
Yeah.
where they could take a
Yeah,
picture
like
of
we
it.
do.
Yep, there you go. And then they'd take a picture of it, and they'd automatically go to our website. Of course, the Bible project was a big draw, too, because people were drawn to the Bible, and that brought them to our webpage. Then they could hear the sermons, and they would listen to it.
What kind of response did you get in Poland from the Bible Project from non-Christians, as far as just interest in that it was being done from a literary perspective?
I don't know about literary perspective, but just in general, shocking that people were very receptive across denominational lines, all the way out. I'm amazed, and it actually went around the world. I'm still in awe that how well that went. I never expected it to go that well. In the beginning, I thought we're probably just going to be doing this for us,
Yeah.
so we could have something that will function. But it just blew up, and I think that had to be of the Lord. The Lord just blessed it. So, I mean,
The reason I ask is because the Gdansk is pretty old, right? The original Gdansk that you revised. How is that as a literary work viewed in Poland? Do you know? Are normal Poland, not among believers, just Poles themselves? Is it
the old Polish would be like our King James, very respected, but obviously older than our King James English. And so in that aspect, as far as literature, highly respected. I mean,
okay?
I met a young lady on a train heading down to Łódź when we were in the middle of this Polish project, and she was studying old Slavic languages, including Polish. Had the Gdansk Bible with her little laptop sitting in this train. And I began talking to her, and she says, yeah, I'm studying the differences in these Slavic languages. And I said, I need to talk to you. And she actually came to work for us on the Polish Bible project because she was so thoroughly knowledgeable about this old language. She became our dictionary, really. And so that worked out. So they do study it. They do respect it. Now, the Catholics have a problem because it's not Catholic, but
Right.
as far as literature, they respected it. Yeah. And it was highly respected in Poland.
And so, what's the response now in those quarters from the revision?
I was shocked. We have Roman Catholics ordering our Bible. So,
Really?
Yeah. Simply amazing. Now, it's not going to become their official standard because there's a problem with...
Well, we can hope. Don't sell yourself short. You might get a call from Francis.
Yeah, we've got to get that Neil Obstat on there, and then we can move forward. But till we get that, it's not going to go too much farther. So, but here and there, and then it was Germans picked it up. I mean, as far as Australia, we sent.
What do you mean Germans picked it up?
Well, they do a lot of evangelism. The German Christians.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, and so they put it with the German Bible. They put it with the English, and making New Testaments where they distribute. So, a lot of evangelists that come over from Germany into Poland evangelizing. The Eastern European Missions, it's a Church of Christ organization. They picked it up and they send them into prisons, our New Testaments, and they print them themselves though.
Okay.
They asked if they would have permission to print them with their logo. I said sure. That was the intent. We're not trying to this is not a money making project for us. This was to get the gospel out. So it's going out into prisons, and I don't know how many thousands they printed. Gideon's picked it up. They're printing it now. So
is that now their text for their?
That is their Bible that they distribute in Poland now. So which was shocking.
So I got a comment from Cassidy Riggs. I just heard recently that the updated Gdansk Bible is second favorite Bible amongst Christians.
Yeah.
Favorite / most used.
What's the favorite Bible then?
Probably the Roman Catholic one, but
amongst Christians?
Well, they still have what would be amongst Christians would be the Warsaw, which is the one that supposedly replaced the Gdansk.
Okay.
But when we were there, nobody was really happy with the translation, but at least they could read it, and so they were willing to overlook the considered flaws because it was readable, and then that was the use. And you know that people, they have traditions, and once you're used to reading the Bible, you don't want to change. So,
well, that's everyone, especially if you've read it for a long time.
Yeah,
I mean that's kind of where I am with the Spanish Bible, the English Bible. I have changed. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, but I've changed a lot on my view on translations and all of these things. But I have no interest in reading any other Bible because it makes sense to me. It's familiar with me. It's not a judgment on any other translation. It's just, I understand why some people might have a problem with it, but to me, it's like this. I understand what I'm reading, and I know what to expect. The grammar makes sense. The way it's phrasing, all of it just makes sense to me when I read it.
Well, you can't beat the King James as far as literature. I mean, it was written to be read in public, and so it's a great piece of literature. You're just not going to beat it. Even good translations in English don't compare to the literary quality of the King James. So you can get readability in a modern version, but as far as the quality of just English, I'm not even talking about translation, just the English, man, that's
yes,
just
it
like
is.
monumental.
It is. And like people like Daniel Wallace they point that out, that there is a majesticness, if you want to call it that, of the King James that is pretty much unparalleled. Yeah. But it really is. I mean, I don't know a lot of languages, but it seems to be unparalleled. Certainly in Spanish. Spanish doesn't come close, in my opinion, to that quality we're talking about.
Yeah. The Gdansk and the older Roman Catholic Bible would be not. I wouldn't even want to compare because it's just extraordinary, our English Bible. But the Gdansk had something similar as far as literary quality was respected. And as I mentioned earlier, people were reading it just for literature purposes. So
and historical now, isn't it? Isn't that kind of a Bible like that? Isn't it sort of a touchstone or a milestone of historicity when it comes to their language and where their language is coming from?
Because there was a great pressure with the occupation in Poland that really centralized the language, because you had different groups, regions of Poland, and Poland has been divided up so many times. So there was a lot of pressure on the language, and the Russians came in after the war, centralized the language, and then forced all the kids to learn Russian, and that has influence on the language as well. And so when we were preaching out of that Gdansk Bible, people just didn't understand unless they were older. If they were older, they said, yeah, we used to talk that way. So that was always interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So then where are you guys at with as far as the addition or the revision you've done? Is that like the final product, or is there things in there that you would think need to be revisited as a revision?
We're always revisiting, because even with computers, even with professional editors, we had like 25 grammarians going over it. We had professional, they weren't necessarily Christian, but these were professional businesses that their business was to edit
Copywriters.
Well, not necessarily copywriters, but they would edit grammar, and so we had big business.
Wasn't that what copywriters do?
I'm not really sure what
I think so.
copywriters do.
Yeah.
All right, if that's what they
I think
do.
that's what they call them. The ones that they're not. They don't edit the content. They edit the actual
Exactly.
grammar, spelling,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
And of course, they only guarantee like 95% accuracy or 90%. So
I got to get into a business like that. I guarantee 95%.
yeah, how do you judge that?
Yeah.
You're like, hey, what's going on? So, but we find mostly cut and paste errors. When you cut something out and you paste it, you ended up duplicating. Mm-hmm. We find things like that.
Same problem that they had back when they were handwriting the Bible.
Yes.
Did you ever hear about that? The Catholic Church did a hand done facsimile edition of the Vaticanus.
No.
Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't.
The Catholic Church wanted to put out a limited run of the Vaticanus facsimile, but they wanted it like hand done, like it would have been done originally. So they hired calligraphers, I guess, or whatever,
Like
professional.
real professional.
Yeah,
people,
professionals to
good
right
guys at it.
to go, and they got like the material. They did it on vellum. They did the whole thing, like if they were redoing it, right? Yeah. When they got done, they had missed a whole page.
Yeah.
And they had to paste it in.
Yeah.
They missed a page, and
So-
that's what the most modern techniques and working under the brightest lights, if you will.
Exactly.
That crazy?
That's what's amazing about our older Bibles, that they could do so well.
It is amazing.
Because we have computers, spell checkers, and then we had professional grammarians. Now, we haven't really retranslated anything.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one or two places.
What would be something you've retranslated?
I wish I could remember now, but there were places that we ourselves weren't sure when we were doing it. It could go either way. We just weren't sure. We couldn't get consensus amongst our grammarians on how to do it. And then after we published it, people would begin saying, hey, what about this? Don't you think it ought to be this way? And so that there were very few of those, very few. Most of the changes that we have made have been duplications of a word, because there was so much in the Polish language that everything was attached to pronouns. The word order was different, the structure was different, and so you ended up moving these pronouns and words into a different position in the sentence, and then sometimes you left that, and so you get this duplication. So you'd have the repeated twice in a sentence, as we'd have to pick up that. The other is the accents on the words, that they weren't accented. It was just typos. So we found a lot of those that were corrected. And then we, when it's distributed and so many people begin reading it, and they just write in and say, hey, would you look at this? I think this is a mistake. And then that's just a process that really helps. You get more eyes on it. And that's what we tried to do when we were doing it. We tried to get as many eyes, different eyes on it that we could, but it's just a tedious process. But I'm amazed, we're not talking about more than 5 pages worth of errata over, I'm not even sure, since.
And so do you guys fix those as you do new editions?
When we do new editions. In fact, we had a problem with our mini warehouse. Don't be deceived. It's a garage. So,
it's not a fulfillment center.
No. It's a old wood shop that we store our Bibles in, and so we'd have these new editions coming in, and so we had different types of Bibles that we began printing, and we would have the New Testament, and then we began printing in leather. We'd have leather bound. Then we have some with zippers on them, and then some with the little indexes on it. So there's a lot of variety. Some smaller editions, some with notes like wide margin, and then we had some with large print. So we started getting this variety of types of Bible, as far as the size and whatnot. And then when people order, they'd say, "I want the newest edition." Well, you got this little mini warehouse stack. Well, how do you find the newest edition? Well, maybe I can remember we put that pallet over here in that corner. So we decided, well, let's just get rid of these. And I'd talked to a brother, a Mennonite in Warsaw, and he had a vision of sending our Bible to all the churches in Poland. And I talked to him. I said, "Man, that's a great idea. You find out what needs to be done, and if you can get your supporters to help with it, hey, we'll do everything we can to help." Well, I didn't hear from him for a year, but it was in the back of my mind, so I wrote him, "Hey, how you doing on that?" "Well, I haven't formed my letter yet." I'm thinking, you got this great idea. So I said, "All right, well, you keep on working on that letter, and we'll just go ahead and get it done." So we decided we were going to try to send out 50 Bibles to every church in Poland.
50 to each church?
Each church.
Okay.
Yeah. And we just thought, well, we have this edition quagmire in our warehouse, our mini warehouse. We'll just give everything we have away.
Have a fire sale.
Yeah, we didn't sell anything, but we
Right.
we shipped them up, and we found out, originally we thought there would be 300 churches. Turned out to be 600. We found out a lot of churches. So we couldn't do the 50.
Mm-hmm.
We just reduced the number. I don't remember what it was, 25 or 20. I don't remember the numbers. Don't quote me on the numbers, but the idea was there.
Right.
So we sent them out to the churches, and then they really loved them because they started using for pew Bibles, and then they would start requesting orders. And we got a brother. His full-time task is just handling orders. He's deals with the couriers all the time, and he works at our little mini warehouse, and he's set up there to get orders out. And so it's a mini Amazon.
Bible Amazon.
But I was just completely in shock how successful this has been as far as.
And what is
reach.
what is the response to it as far as, like, here in the States, I think that the discussion or the criticism or the judgment or discernment on it would be the textual basis, the textual differences or textual decisions. Is that an issue in Poland? Do they look at Bibles the way we do here?
It's becoming an issue. Americans have a lot of affluence around the world, and so their issues become Polish issues, unfortunately. So it really wasn't an issue for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Even the new Warszawska, they could not go they couldn't go completely to the critical text because everybody was used to reading their old Gdansk Bible, and they were not happy with these changes that they want to make. So they couldn't go all the way, and so they sort of compromised and went halfway. So they weren't. You couldn't say it was a translation of the critical text. It was a semi.
It was like the Spanish 1960.
Something similar to that. Something similar to that. Yeah. I don't think they went as far as the 60 did, but similar.
Okay.
Yeah. But the problem with the Warszawska was it just did not compare to the Gdansk, and people were complaining, and that's one of the reasons we even.
And what were they complaining about?
It just wasn't it wasn't translated as well. They just didn't like it was.
They didn't like the actual Polish, or they didn't. What do you mean
both.
It wasn't translated well?
Both. The Polish was a big factor. I mean, it just wasn't. I mean, there were what they considered errors in the Polish, which is very possible, as we just mentioned. I mean, you do a project like that, you're always going to find it. And so it wasn't corrected, and that was owned by the Polish Bible Society, so they weren't going to let anybody else make any changes, and so there was that issue, but. People, and one of the things that really convinced us to even get in this project, because that was not our intent ever. And had I known that the amount of work it was going to be involved, I probably wouldn't have gotten.
Right.
Maybe if I could have saw the success that it had, I might have been saying, all right, we can do that. But we went into it in our blind ignorance.
And your naivete.
Yeah, there we go, exactly. And thinking we could get this done in a year. Because I really thought it was just the word order, and they had put the endings of the verbs on the pronouns. I thought, all right, we do that. Maybe change a few archaic words, update those archaic words. We're ready to go. But man, when we got done, we had a mess. And everybody said, well, what is this now? This is like a hodgepodge. So
How much did you do when you first did that? Like a gospel
we started
of
out,
John, or?
yeah, we started off with John. We did John, and then we printed that up and distributed it to as many believers as we could. Not all over Poland, but at least in our churches there in Warsaw. And people asked us, all right, is this an update or is this not an update? Because this is like, we don't know what this is now. Should I read this as modern Polish, or should I continue to remember that this is older Polish and I have to take this into consideration? And I realized, no, this is not going to work. If we're going to do this, we got to do it right. So that caused some troubles, but we started.
Now, did you guys make any textual changes to the Gdansk? Those are all talking about grammar changes, spelling changes, which, in my opinion, is nothingness. But what about any substantive changes?
I'm sure we did somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It would be difficult for me to go to those places. Sometimes it wasn't clear which way to go. And believe me, when it wasn't clear, we tried to leave it unclear.
Right.
We just let the reader figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't trying to press it one. We were accused of trying to, match it to the King James, but it doesn't match to the King James. It never did, and it still doesn't. There's no way. It's not going to
And so
happen.
you didn't have an agenda to do that.
No, and we were not translating the King James. We weren't even, technically it was a translation what we did because of the meaning of the word translation, but it was more of a linguistic update.
Okay.
We were just trying to preserve the Gdansk so that you could read it in modern Polish. That was our intent. Obviously, we looked at every version possible. I mean, I got a real experience of collating lots of different Bibles in lots of different languages because we had multiple people had different abilities, German, Russian. So we had lots of people collating. And when there was a question, we tried to get a consensus.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could get a consensus, then we said, all right, this is the way we're going to go. If there was a question on which way this was saying, because sometimes we just didn't know with the Polish. We just didn't know which way it was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish I could have remembered some of them verses that, which way to go. We did make a decision on like Jehovah, because it was in the Gdansk Bible. And there were some other places that it became very problematic because in Hebrew it would be Jehovah, Jehovah, like you would have in our English Bible, where it'd have either Lord would be all capitalized, and then God would be, it would switch back and forth.
Right.
So we had some issues there that it just wasn't working with us in Polish. So we went ahead with Jehovah. So it'd be like Jehovah God or Lord Jehovah. I don't think we ever did Lord Jehovah, but Jehovah God in those
Right.
situations, which we did get some criticism on that. But it wasn't a fair criticism because Poles really dislike Jehovah's Witnesses. And so they see the word Jehovah,
Right.
and some of them hadn't read the Gdansk Bible in a while. They'd been reading this Warszawska, which did not have Jehovah in it. And so
Really?
what
What did they put in it?
I think they just went with
Did they put
just
Yeshua?
No, they just put
Yeshua?
Lord all the way through. Yeah, they didn't.
Or Yahweh, I guess.
They-
Yahweh. But they didn't do that.
No,
they just did
didn't.
Lord.
They-
Really?
They just Lord all the way through. There was no.
That's
so they
interesting.
weren't. They saw that Jehovah and they're thinking Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
And then when we wrote them back, said, "Well, we're just updating the Gdansk. Here it is." Oh, so it wasn't that type of issue.
Right.
So, very few complaints as far as textually, and
So, what do you think the position of the Bible societies is on this? Because if what Cassidy's saying is that it's now the second favorite Bible for Christians, what does that do for them?
we offered the Polish Bible Society before it was the British Foreign Language Bible Society in Warsaw, but then the Poles took it over, and it was run by Lutherans at a time, but now it's more ecumenical. And when we started this project, because we're talking about 23 years ago, when we started this project, there was no competition. There was either the Gdansk Bible or the Warszawska, and most churches had both. They would quote the Gdansk as the authoritative. It would be like some people quoting the Greek, They'd say, well, our English says here, but the Greek says. And they would say, well, our Varshaska says here, but the Gdansk says. It would be that type of thing. So when we started out, there was no competition. And that's why we got into it. That nobody was doing it. Nobody was willing to do it. And we saw the need repetitively. And so reluctantly we got, okay, let's do it. And like you said, I was very naive. I thought, a year we can get this done. But it was a learning process in lots of different ways. But as the years passed, other people were wanting to get it done. And so by the time we finished, man, there was like 4 or 5 other versions out there. So one of them, which was the New Gdansk, which was a disaster of a translation, but it really confused people because here we have this updated Gdansk, and then we have this other one that's competing with the New Gdansk. And the translator admitted, I don't want to translate anything that's already been done. I want to take the variety. So he would, if there was a nuance on the word, he would take that nuance, and he wasn't trying to update the Gdansk. He was just trying to translate. And so there was a lot of confusion, but that's been cleared up. But then there was a critical text version done. I know the brother that did it, worked on the project. And he said, well, I had a choice. My intent is to translate the Textus Receptus, but I had to decide which one first, so I went with the critical text first. And he actually did a good job as far as translating goes. But we did notice that he used a lot of phrases in the Old Testament that matched the King James.
Really?
Even though he is a Pole, but he does speak English. So
From the but translating the critical text.
It was supposed to be the critical text, but in the Old Testament, lots of times it was, because we were using every version we could find to help us to give the best possible Polish, and so he would send us his manuscripts, what he was doing, and we were comparing as we were going, and we were noticing, hey, this is not this is not Polish here. This is a translation of the English, because you'd collate so much, you begin recognizing patterns.
Sure.
And so that was interesting. But it was supposedly a critical text, his. But again, we have this traditional problem. They didn't want to get away too far from what they had been used to. So.
What would you do now? I mean, if there's all these different ones now in existence, if you were going back to Poland now, would you still do this project like that? Or would you use whatever's available now? Is there another Bible other than the one you guys did available that you could use?
I would have been more reluctant to get into this issue because there were readable Bibles then or now, and they weren't back then. Unfortunately, there's not really any other version that would be a Textus Receptus type translation. And one of the problems I had was, at that time, I was really concerned about maintaining the tradition of the Textus Receptus, which the Gdansk had, and how it was respected. And I struggled. I just couldn't do it for conscience sake, because I'm not against updating the language, because that's what I spent 20 years doing. So I don't have a problem with updating language, but I do think that the reasoning behind new translations is, I don't know what the word would be. They say we want to update the language, but it's not really updating the language. It's actually a new translation. And to me, that's different, if you understand what I mean. And you can ask a question to clarify that if you want. But
I do. I would like you to.
Yeah. But for me at the time, I could not in good conscience, because although I agreed we can update the language of the Bible, I just didn't like the foundation that they were coming from, that the old version was wrong. We got to correct the old version. So I didn't like that. So I could not go with the Warszawska. I was willing to do that, but my conscience wouldn't let me, because I just really disagreed with the principle behind why they were doing that. So I almost went with Brother Joe. I almost convinced him, or was really considering, we'll just use the Catholic Bible, because the Catholic Bible was basically with a few places without, with obviously the Apocrypha,
Right.
but was basically Textus Receptus. So, and it's already respected amongst a Catholic country that's 98% Catholic or 95% Catholic. So let's just use the Catholic Bible. But I had a problem with the Apocrypha. So I couldn't get over that in my hurdle, in my struggle in my mind and conscience. So I said, all right. And everybody was pushing to get this done. Somebody's got to do this. Somebody's got to do this. And if you know me, okay, well, if it's got to be done, let's do it. I'm not an expert at it, but let's get her done. So, and then think that naivety, thinking I could get it done in a year. We bit off more than we could chew, but it was a great learning experience.
So what did that do as far as your because it seems to me, because I've listened to some of your Bible studies you've done recently at the church here in San Antonio on the Bible, studying the Bible, biblical interpretation. And it seems to me that there's been a transformation in how you look at translations, textual issues and things like that. You don't sound like the Brent I knew 20 years ago, let's say that.
Like King James onlyist?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I came to realize that the Bible can be updated. And as I stated, the problems I have is the reasoning behind the updates. That saying that the old version is wrong. Like you had Mark Ward on your program here, I really like his writings. I like his attitude more than anything. He has a great attitude. But to me, if you're going to update it, if that's the issue, if the language is the issue, then why don't we just keep the standard and update the old standard? And if Mark and Wallace and all these other ones that are worried about the language and readability, and they're saying that all versions of the Word of God, if they would just update that old standard and everybody went that way, then I wouldn't have a problem going that way. But they're not. So that's the struggle. They didn't go that way. They have. I don't think God's intent was everybody gets their preferred version, what I prefer. I don't think that was in the intent. So I have a problem with that in my own
What do you
mind.
mean by that? Because I hear that a lot. That's something that's interesting to me. So this is where I've changed a lot over the same period of time, and for probably following a different path than you have, and probably have changed more than you have on it. I used to say that a lot, and I hear a lot of people say that. It's like, well, you're getting your preferred version. I don't understand that. How is any? I look at any translation we want to mention, bring out, and to say, well, somebody prefers that suits their preference better. Is that actually a fair criticism, you think?
I think it is, and I can give you a good, clear example. Sometimes it might be muddled.
All right.
A Jehovah's Witness has his preferred version. It says what it wants it to say. So the Bible's not teaching him. He's found a Bible they've actually made a Bible that fits their doctrine. That's their preference. They preferred that. They don't like it saying in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They don't like that. That's not their preference. And so they prefer it to say a God. Right, so that's their preference. But they prefer that.
Don't you think that there's a chasm between the Jehovah's Witnesses and what they're doing with the Bible, which I think most Christians would not assume them to be born again or saved or even honest in some ways, and actual Christians who I think are honest and sincere. And I don't know. To me, that seems like a false flag to use the Jehovah's Witness manipulation of the text.
It gives you a clear example about preferences. They prefer it to say this way. The Bible ought to be teaching us. We shouldn't be teaching the Bible.
Well, I understand what it means to have a preference. What I'm asking you is, do you think that Christians like Daniel Wallace are choosing a Bible because they prefer it? I don't know that that's a fair criticism of actual Christians.
I don't know. I can't speak for
and I'm not
Daniel
speaking
Wallace.
to right. I'm just you're right. I'm just using him as an example. But I mean, I look at and when I'm talking about the major translations. Is there somebody out there who on their lonesome is coming up with translations because he wants the Bible to read a certain way? Sure. But we talking about committee-driven translations like NIV, NASV? I don't know. That just seems
Well, from my perspective, I don't think that going out and getting a Bible is like going out and getting a car. I like white. I don't like black. I like this. I like that. I think God gives us the Bible, and we ought to use the Bible that God gives us. So that if you can understand that perspective. So if I'm going out, well, let me give you an example on just the form of the Bible. So
Okay.
I like leather, so I'm going to go get a leather Bible. And you could understand that. I prefer that over hardback. They're doing it because of what they like. But if it becomes the idea of, well, I like the way it says it here, then that becomes a preference. And I'm not saying that I'm not even going to be judging somebody. I got enough
Right.
problems to deal with my own issues.
Right.
But the idea, the principle of we get to pick our Bible, I just disagree with that. I think the Bible is given to us. We don't get to go pick. And that would be the problem. It becomes clear when you go to that edge of the Jehovah's Witness, that extreme, and that makes the idea that I'm expressing here about preference, that makes it clear. And I wasn't trying to assume that any modern version was trying to, manipulate the text.
Right.
But that would be the definition of preference. We prefer it to say this way. Some people don't like Jehovah. They prefer Yahweh or whatever it is. That would be a preference, and they lean that way because they prefer. They think it's better. They think that Jehovah is an error, so they prefer it this way, and they would go that way. So
It seems to me
I would
that-
disagree with that.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems to me that most Christians that I deal with, and that's a very small number of people, right? Because I have an extremely small circle of contact. But most of the people I deal with, the preference that I could say they have is one that they prefer something they can understand.
Yeah.
And it's more about whether or not they can even understand it. One of the things that was difficult for me and made me have to change some of the ways I think about this was I deal with construction workers. That's who I deal with. That's my circle, my life. And I'll have people that I'm dealing with that do want to understand the Bible. They're not making excuses. They're not just saying, the typical ridiculous, the these and the thous, as if no one knows what those mean. Everyone knows what they mean. They just see you say that. I'm talking about people that really do want to understand the Bible, that have, a mess in their life, and they're looking for answers. And they'll read it if I tell them to read it, and they don't understand what it's saying. And that was difficult for me for a while because I was reluctant, to say the least, to recommend them to read a different translation than the King James. But they're not understanding it. I just have to tell them what it means, which kind of defeats the purpose in my point of them
And that's
reading it.
if you understood it yourself.
Right, that's assuming that. Exactly. So, they had one particular person who, without me telling him, I didn't tell him, but he went and bought the Bible in basic English, or
ESV, I think it was.
was it?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
it was
It was one of these
I
translations.
think that's the one I told him to go.
Oh, you did. Oh,
I'm the sinful man.
now the truth is coming out. Now you know who you're around. And then all of a sudden he's saying, "Well, now I can understand this." And
Well, I could actually have a conversation with him now about the Bible. I think he read John. I think he started with Matthew. And we could talk about Matthew, and I could tell him what I thought it was saying in some parts. And he goes, yeah, and it was talking about this and that. And understandable.
Yeah.
Saying what I thought it was saying, and he agreed with that's what it was saying. And it was easier to have a conversation with somebody about the Bible, especially with someone like him who didn't really want to read the KJV because he wasn't getting it.
But you're talking about vocabulary. So if you're,
it's more than vocabulary.
if you were,
It's the grammar.
okay. Well, yeah, okay.
It's
the
how it's
grammar
structured. Yes,
the grammar
it's
structure.
it's structured. Now, like I was saying originally, I like that structure. It makes
Yeah.
sense to me. I read the modern translations, and I struggle with them because they're not worded the way I'm expecting. Right? It's just there's something I expect. I anticipate as I read the KJV.
But back to this point, whether we say the vocabulary or the grammar structure, that's the same umbrella. So if I'm dealing with a blind man and he needs a Braille Bible, I don't have a problem with him reading a Braille Bible. So, but if his Braille Bible does not agree with the consensus version, then were those places where they don't agree, I think the consensus hold. So I don't have a problem with anybody reading anything they want. Read what you want. Read what's going to help you. Use every available tool. Read commentaries to understand it. Do whatever you can to understand the Scriptures. But I believe that God intended us to use a standard. And I think even Mark Ward mentioned this in his book, that, and from my perspective, if all of these guys from the critical text side would say, listen, the grammar, the structure is very important. We want people to understand the Bible. If they would take our King James and update, which some of them have, if they would just start using that, I think the problem would go away.
Which problem?
The problem about, which version everybody fighting over. If the real issue is readability, we want to reach the modern person so that they can understand it, so they don't have these issues. Well, that's not the way we read anymore. And then we just updated the modern version and everybody used it. I think that even the most extreme King James people they would find themselves on an island and say, look, everybody's using this Textus Receptus in modern English. I can't hold out anymore. Let's go. And I think that was one of the points with Mark. When is that going to happen?
See, I don't think that ever is going to happen.
It may not.
I don't think the extreme KGVOs will ever, under any circumstance, accept that.
Not when everybody has their own version.
I don't think they'd accept it if 99.9% of everyone was using the same Bible. They still wouldn't.
They would have a leg to stand on, though, as far as the argument goes.
I think a lot of them don't have a leg to stand on now.
Well, that's true, too.
I don't think legs matter to them.
But there are
and of
people,
course, I'm speaking of the extreme ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, I want to be clear on that.
I would not have a problem if all the churches I say all, relatively speaking, if all the churches in the world began using an updated King James version, then I could say, all right, okay, this is what God's doing. This is what He's using His church for. Let's go for it. So the language is not the issue for me.
And why couldn't you use one now? Or could you? Like, I've always wondered. I've thought of that myself. It's like, I don't like reading from a Bible that I feel like I have to translate it in my sermon. One thing, there's a difference between explaining what a word might mean that someone might be unfamiliar with, because it doesn't matter how rudimentary the vocabulary is. You're always going to have a word someone in the someone in the audience might not understand,
or not even understand the context.
Correct. And so it's not that, but when you have to basically rephrase the text, and it depends on your audience. Like if I have my construction workers in the audience, that's what's going to happen. I can read it, and then I have to paraphrase it. Otherwise, I might as well just read it in Greek, because no one's understanding what I'm saying. They're not following it. Not in any way where I want to actually do a expository teaching on the text. It's important that they understand what the text is really saying.
Well, I think we have to be careful here, because there is a spiritual aspect of this issue. People don't want to read the Bible for other issues than just vocabulary or grammar or structure. There's that issue. And those things become pretexts or excuses.
Like, what do you mean exactly?
So they just don't want to read the Bible.
Okay.
It's not in their nature. That's not what they want to do. And so when we encourage them to read the Bible and then they experience a difficulty, well, that becomes a great excuse. See, I have a difficulty. Right? Now, the other side, they're saying, okay, well, we could eliminate that difficulty by making it easier to read. But you still have the same problem. They're still not reading the Bible. And I don't have the statistics with me, but it's amazing that the King James is still being read the most.
It's used by 35% of all U.S. churches. I believe it was the last one I read, statistic.
That to me is amazing. Yeah.
It is amazing.
Because you would think, okay, we got these modern versions here, people are going to read it more. But that's not the case. People are not reading the Bible more. There is Bible ignorance everywhere. And so to me, it's a spiritual issue that the Lord has to work in their hearts. I mean, if you want to read the Bible, you're going to read the Bible. Right?
What I'm saying, though, is as far as me, my dilemma for the last, I don't know, maybe 2 years, and I don't know how to resolve it. So I'm just I'm not doing anything. I'm just staying where I've always been. But my dilemma is that when I'm preaching or teaching, I don't like that I'm reading what people aren't understanding and that I have to re-paraphrase it. And part of me would like to use a Bible, use a translation, use a translation that would be more understandable to the audience as I'm speaking.
Well, they have updated King James versions.
Yeah.
So
But what would you think of that? That's my question. I mean, I know they're there. It's not that
what I think is, if you're going to read the Bible, I'm happy. If you're not going to read the King James and you're reading the English
from the
standard,
pulpit.
I personally believe that churches ought to have a standard. I think God's given us a standard. We ought to stick with that.
But does that standard mean the 1611?
No, it's not language. It's not language. So you could have the standard Bible in any language, obviously. So you could have an updated King James version and read it.
But would that still be considered a standard for you?
Well, standard in the sense that we have an established text that everybody recognizes. There's no debate over it. There's a consensus. Then yes.
But there is none. I don't know that there's any pathway to that. Even updating the language of the KJV, I think that there is a substantial number of KJV only. It's not even the extreme ones that would not accept that as a standard.
Well, that historically,
the KJV the 21st century KJV or whatever that one is.
But that would over time would dissipate, just like the Geneva. When our King James came out, there were churches still using the Geneva, and over time, the King James was the recognized standard. So first generations, yes, there would be difficulty, of course, and I wouldn't even expect these other churches to change. But if everybody would get on the same page, look, we want a standardized text that everybody can read. If all parties would get along, then that's the direction we ought to be going. I think that was the direction that was supposed to happen back in 1880 when Westcott and Hort and crew first translated. Everybody was in agreement. We need to update this language. Let's do it. Unfortunately, they weren't just updating. They translated something different. And that, when people began reading it, had great fanfare. Over 1 million editions came out when it first came out. And everybody was receiving it. But then they began reading it and then raising objections. And this is the problem that I have with the other side. And look, Michael, for me, if whatever church Bible they're reading, if they're reading the Bible, I'm happy. I'm happy. It would be just like, and excuse me, I don't mean to use Jehovah's Witness, but that makes it clear to see what I'm saying. So when I'm talking to Jehovah's Witness, and he doesn't like 1 John 5:7, well, I'm not going to argue with him on 1 John 5:7 because there's no point. I need to use his Bible to show him the doctrine that's in the Bible. So, or with a Catholic the same way. You were in Mexico. How many times had they said, oh, that's that Protestant Bible? And we said, all right, get your Catholic Bible. The commandments are the same. And so we would use their Bible. But it doesn't mean we're rejecting the standard text. We're just showing here, hey, where there's a difference, I think the standard takes priority. So, and even, if I'm talking to a brother that prefers the English Standard Version, and then we have a verse that's different, then I'm going to stick with the old one. To me, it's not vocabulary or grammar structure. I'll give you an example with very well-known text, 1 John 5:7. When I was younger, and I dealt with Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm using them as an example because it's the clarity. When I dealt with Jehovah's Witnesses, it was a fight over interpretation. They said, nope, this means they're one in unity. There was none of this. This is not original. This is not true. It was a fight over how to interpret it. As time progressed, in my own experience with more and more versions coming out, when I dealt with Jehovah's Witnesses, suddenly that's not in the original. How they would ever prove that, I don't know, but that was their new argument. Whereas before, we were discussing how to interpret this text. But over time, now they don't even, it's in their mind, that's not even Scripture. It's not even a matter of no use to interpret it because it's not even Scripture. And I think these modern versions have aided that. And that was shocking for me as a young man, and probably made me overzealous, no doubt, as that I would hear these same arguments that I'd heard in dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses. Now they were coming from Christians, and I always had a problem with that. So what's going on here? So for me, you can make 1 John 5:7 readable. Not that it's not readable as it is now. You can make some of these verses readable. If we're talking about grammar, structure, or vocabulary, you can make it readable and still have the same text. And then we could discuss about how to interpret it. But now they're just eliminating. And again, we're really only fighting over probably 200 verses. Maybe.
Yeah, if that.
If that.
If that. I mean, I went through and did a somewhat somewhat exhaustive comparison on that, and I know it's been done upteen times, but I did one for myself. Mm-hmm. And compared the actual textual basis of the passages we're talking about, and what difference do they really make? Setting aside like the big three, which is Mark, the ending verses of Mark, and John 8, and 1 John 5:7. Set those aside. I wasn't looking at those, but look at all the others where we're saying these are textual differences, and for the most part, we're talking about really inconsequential stuff. The one of the biggest ones I found that to me was like, okay, this is something is where it's either for or therefore. It's like, is it for or is it therefore? And that makes a difference if you care about context. Now, if you don't care about context, it makes no difference whatsoever. Mm-hmm. But if you care about context and exegesis, well, then it matters. Is he making an argument or is he giving an explanation? And that was like one of the bigger ones. So the ones I looked at, it just wasn't as big of an issue as I thought it was. Not to say that it doesn't matter. I'm just saying it wasn't. In my mind, I had the boogeyman scenario. It's like, these are other Bibles.
Everybody's a heretic.
Yeah, this is all this heresies being introduced, these terrible, terrible changes. And I look at it and say, it looked to me like this is like something that should have stayed. This argument should have stayed in the seminary and shouldn't have gotten into the churches.
Exactly. So from my perspective and experience, when I was younger, it was like, okay, you wear a tie, you heretic. Or, remember the debates over the Trinity, whether it was water or egg. Yeah. And if you took either side, other than the side that I was on, you were a heretic. Correct. It wasn't really serious. So in my younger years, it was more like, oh, you read a modern version, you heretic. It was more like, it wasn't really a heresy. It was just joking. Maybe we probably shouldn't have been joking. But then over time, I began, these guys are serious. Yeah. They aren't just, they really do think these guys are heretics. So I don't think I ever really thought sincerely that a person was a heretic because they read the New American Standard Version. It was more of a jesting type thing. It wasn't what I was going to read because I had a different perspective. But again, read what you want to understand it. But, a church has to make a decision. Mm-hmm. And I think the principles behind these versions are different. I think that we have to recognize what God has given us and then go with that. And if everybody would get back onto the page of, all right, let's update the King James. If all sides would do that, then in a generation, I think we would see that. You've always had people. There's probably somebody that's still hanging on to the Geneva. So we're not going to we're not going to get 100%.
Well, I understand what you mean by everybody. Yeah. I don't think you're going to get anybody because I don't think any side is willing to do that. I think those that
exactly right.
I think those that are of the textual criticism mindset, they see that textual criticism has always, from the very beginning, been a part of biblical transmission, and they're not going to give that up. And they see that sticking to the traditional text or the Textus Receptus is abandoning the very practice that brought it into existence. Yeah. That would be their argument. That would be like the James White argument, that the Textus Receptus is a product of textual criticism, and to say
inferior.
that now. Huh?
Inferior.
Well, I wouldn't even put. I don't think that's not how they would word it. Now they may see it. Someone may see it that way, but the argument I'm presenting is not my argument. The one I've heard in the side I'm talking about, which I think are the reasonable side. I like the Daniel Wallace side of the argument, which is in my opinion, the reasonable side, even though I don't agree with him, but I think he's very reasonable. And his argument and the James White argument on that line is the Textus Receptus is a product of textual criticism. Erasmus was doing textual criticism against the standard of his day, which was the Vulgate, to produce his own Latin translation. And to say that therefore meant that was then the end of all available textual criticism and can never be done again, they find that unpalatable. Yeah. And then you have the KJV side; they're not going to accept. What if the textual criticism people said, let's all standardize around one critical text, the Nestle-Aland 27. That's it. That's the end. We're going to stop right now. No more textual criticism. That'll be it. I don't think the other side will accept that. I mean, nobody's going to accept anything.
That's what I tried to mention earlier. It's a heart issue. It's not a vocabulary or a grammar structure issue. It's a heart issue. And I think we all have to get back. What I had to do, here I was thrust into this idea of updating the Bible in Polish. I had no idea how to do this. I wasn't. There was no way I was going to translate from Hebrew or Greek. I might get away with some parts of Greek. I could probably figure that out, with the aid of a lot of books.
Well, that's not exactly translation.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like me. You're looking at what's translated. You're looking at the English line.
Yeah, exactly. But you could. The point is, I did not know how to translate. So
did you see that?
I just started going.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. You got.
So I just started going through the Bible because both sides, I think, have an error. They think they are preserving the original. And how would you ever prove that? I asked both sides several times, what was the original finger-written Ten Commandments? What did it look like? Can you tell me? And if they're fighting over jot and tittles, neither side can tell me. They just can't do it. What did Jesus say when he spoke the parable of the sower? Was it the devil? Was it Satan? Or was it the wicked one? Tell me, which one did he say? What was the original word? You can't do it. So, and I think even Wallace admits that, we're never going to know the original. So why this continual bashing? Well, the King James is wrong because it doesn't follow the original. Or why the other side, the King James extremists, bashing some other Bible because it doesn't follow the King James, and the King James is an exact replica of the original. It's the same erroneous argument in my
I agree.
viewpoint. It's an erroneous argument because you could never prove that. How could you ever prove it? If you produced an original, then I can make comparison and say, you know what, you're right. The original says this. I can see you're right, but they never can produce it. It's just their conjecture. So I have a real problem with that issue.
I agree completely with that, but at the same time, there's an element to that is difficult for me, and that is that we can't pretend as if a Bible could just say anything it wants to say in 1800. I mean, we do, I wouldn't say have to, we do expect, at least the average reader for sure, expects that what they're reading is a translation of what was actually written, not what was changed and became written later. Now, I'm not saying that's a correct assumption. There's a lot of argument to be made, I think, that assumption might not be the right assumption to make. For instance, that was a really good example you just gave. So we have three. Let's assume that all three of these accounts of the sower that you mentioned are original in their writing, right? So Matthew wrote, forget which one who wrote which, but Matthew writes.
He translated.
Well, but the actual. Let's say we found the actual original document of Matthew, and it says the wicked one or the.
You're right. I got you.
Right, and the other one says that, and we got the actual original. But none of those are actually original unless Jesus preached the sermon three different ways.
They were translations, each one translated.
But Jesus said one thing. What did he say?
Yeah.
He may not have said any one of those three.
That's true. But the meaning was all three of them. That's the point.
I do understand that, but
the idea, it's got to be jot and tittle. There is a variety in translation. You can say the same thing in a variety of ways. This is a problem I have with extreme King James onlyism. Things that are different are not the same. Well, that's not true. That parable is the same in all four Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's saying the same thing. Different versions of it. So there can be different versions. There can be variety in that sense, in translation, obviously. And then you get into quality. So, for example, Adam Tovinsky, who recently passed away, he was a great translator. Man, he was good. His quality of translation exceeded that of Joe West's translation. And Joe's a good translator. But both were accurate. But their ability. So we talk about the King James. I mean, this is just really good ability. They have a way of expressing things. Whereas maybe some other version, both could be accurate, but literary or grammatical structures, maybe the English here expresses it better. So I don't have that problem. That's not my issue. My issue is why are we rejecting what God has so obviously given to us across the board? And let me give you an example to show you. Let's say we're 200 years ago, where everybody in America is using the King James, right? We all agree very few of anybody is using something else. Somebody might have their own private edition, but if that disagreed with the standard King James, we're not gonna accept it. But there was always differences in the King James. I have multiple different editions of the King James, and there's variety in it. Whether it's a capitalization of spirit, whether it's another word choice, and depending on the editions you have, you're going to find jot and tittle differences. So what do you do in those situations? Well, we had one situation that was very obvious, easy to handle, and it will give us some light on how we'd handle the Bible issue debate today. So when that edition comes out and says, "Thou shalt commit adultery," everybody knows, nope, that's just a typo. Why? Because everybody knows. Everybody's been reading it, and so we know that was a typo. It wasn't that, the word order was changed, and nobody probably would have even complained. You can find in editions of the King James, word orders are different, or definitely spellings are different, So those types of issues haven't really been a problem until now. I mean, in this debate now, that everybody's fighting over every little inch, and I think it's just exaggerated. But if we would all get back to the idea of what even Mark Ward mentioned, get back to the idea of a readable, modern English standard version. I think that was the intent of the King James translators. I think they accomplished it. I think that was the intent of God. But now it's everybody for themselves. And you say, can it ever happen again? It may not. We might be in a place now in church history that it's everybody for themselves and what I want. But going back to the principle, what does the Scriptures tell us on how to find the Scriptures? That would be my question. And
Here's a question I have for you. We can get to that in a minute. But before I forget this. As it pertains to what we've been talking about so far. So you're making a big deal, or putting a lot of I don't mean to say dismissive. You're putting a lot of emphasis on having a standard edition, basically. But let's go back before the printing press. That didn't exist. So how is it that we need that today if they didn't need that for 1,500 years?
You mean it didn't exist in...
There is no evidence in before the printing press that there was any standardized printed or written text.
Sure. They had the Vulgate. There was variety within the Vulgate, just as there was... Yeah, there was more variety. You are correct. But just as within the King James editions, there's variety. But the difference was everybody recognized our goal is the standard version. So if your particular copy that you made personally You went down to the temple and made a copy with your handwritten copy, and then you went home, and then you got talking with your son, and you noticed that his copy was a little bit different. Then it wasn't a matter of, well, I prefer mine, I'm a better copyist of you. Then you both or all of us would work together to figure out, all right, what are we going to do? And so
I think that's a bit of a
would,
romanticized perspective.
no, it's practical. It's what people do all
What I
the
say
time.
is romanticized, meaning that if we go back and look at the copies they had, there is much more difference between the Vulgate editions than there is between the English translations.
Because of printing, yes.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like there were some random ones out there with a little bit of differences. They were all different, and the differences were far greater, far exceeded the difference between the NIV and the KJV.
And the point I'm trying to make is they were not emphasizing or preferring the differences. Even though there were more difference because of handwriting copying, the intent was to have a standardized text.
But how do we know that?
They weren't, well, we know it from history. When Jesus says, go read the scriptures, he wasn't saying, go get whatever you want to read and read, or go get the Secretarian version. When he says they're reading the scriptures, it's implied everybody's reading the same thing.
I don't know about
So
that.
how would you define the word scriptures when you says, search the scriptures? What are we talking about? I think there's a definite implication of that meaning, and in that definition is the standardized text.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a good argument. But as I compare that to whatever evidence there is of what they had, it doesn't seem to fit the evidence of how it's being used.
Because you see variety.
And
Variety doesn't mean that they weren't trying to have a principled edition. The King James translators and translators around, at least the reformers, were all endeavoring to have one principled edition.
Well, I'm talking about going back before the printing press, so before 1500, and we see tremendous amount of
Variety.
differences, correct, between everything. There is no group of manuscripts out there that are close. I mean, in a sense. Now, what we're talking about in detail. This is why I think the discussion has leaked out of its proper bounds, and that's to me lamentable, because people. This is one of the things that I got to where I really didn't like about the discussion, and that is that and I like how you approach it better, and I respect that a lot about it. But for a lot of people, this has become an issue of, well, I have my Bible and you have your Bible and they have their Bible, and I don't see it that way. I used to. I think there's one Bible. There's the Christian Bible.
That's exactly right.
And there are many translations of it and many revisions of it, and there's copies of it, and there's a lot of minor differences. But putting aside the obvious printer errors or spelling errors, you're not going to open the Bible and find something different. I think there are KJV, sincere, honest, beloved brethren, KJV beloved brethren, who honestly believe that if they opened the NIV, they would find it telling them to go commit adultery. I exaggerate on the point, but they think they're going to find something just horrible in its pages.
Well, we don't want to build our argument on the extremes. And we know that King James onlyism has gone, at least we should know, has gone to extremes.
My argument isn't against KJV onlyism, though, on that. It is that the argument itself has taken these, in my opinion, these minor differences that are found in translations, modern translations, which to me are very minor, and have turned them into being this huge argument.
And that comes back to the erroneous foundation, which has been my principle, and the problem that I have is this idea of jot and tittle preservation.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as jot and tittle preservation. It's unattainable. You can never prove it. How can you prove it? We have two different versions of the Ten Commandments that Moses wrote. We have no idea what God wrote with his finger, because we don't have that. And so if we're going to get down to jot and tittle, then we got some issues. But if we're having what the meaning is, well, we don't have a problem. So whether he says, thou shalt not, or never, or whatever, the variant is, we don't have, because we understand it. And go back to your point about the manuscripts. I don't think chaos was ever the intent.
I don't either.
I think the variety was not intentional. I think the intent was that everybody have the same text, and that's my point.
Well, I agree. I would agree that everyone would have the
And
same
the
text
issues-
is the intent, right? But the variety of it is, and I see it as being two things. Primarily, it is an unavoidable consequence of transmission. And we get it even, like you were saying with your Polish one, done digitally. You have those kind of, I bet you have more errata in your Polish Bible than some manuscripts had when they made their copy.
I wouldn't know how to prove that. But
Well, there are some
point-
that are
to your
done, and
point,
you can find almost
anybody that-
zero differences.
Anybody that would come along and take our first edition and say, oh, this word is repeated twice in this sentence. This is the authoritative edition. That would be an error,
Correct.
right? And the same thing with these manuscripts. I think that people were reasonable when he made a copy and you made a copy and we made a copy, where they all agreed we have absolute authority. Where there was any difference, 9 times out of 10, it was probably spelling, probably, flipping of a word order, those types of error. Those are numerous. If there was any doctrinal error, or perceived, in this case, perceived doctrinal difference, how would we resolve that? Well, we could get it, well, I prefer this. My version is better than yours. The one in my hand is the final authority. And that becomes an ego issue, and not the intent. I think the intent is, okay, let's find out what the standardized meaning is. And so us three would go over to the church up the road and say, okay, what do you guys got? And if they all agreeing with yours, then him and I probably ought to say, you know what, I think our copy is wrong. I think that was the intent. And if we can get back to what is the definition of Scripture, and once we get that defined, then we can go from there. But now we have to find the original. Well, why do we have to find the original? Why all this effort on Texas criticism when the very best are saying we're never going to find the original? And what would you do if you found the original? How would you know?
Well, right. I mean, yes, but that's a bit of an oversimplification of what textual criticism is about, I think.
They are trying to reestablish the original.
Not exactly. I would say not exactly. I'm not. So I think that textual criticism gets a lot of a bad name. And partly it's due because they've made a lot of bad statements. Especially, true, both sides, but I'm speaking to that side right now. Mm-hmm. And especially you go back when they first really got started in the late 1800s, and their claims and statements against the traditional text were way out of bounds. And they, in my opinion, as far as I can tell, they drew first blood. They started a big fight over some small things. And then the other side, I think, in a sense, rightfully defended and got a little nasty too. And now it's just gotten real nasty.
Well, that's the problem. It's gotten out of hand. It's bitterness, envy, pride,
but here's something that I've noticed, and you may see it differently. But what I've noticed is that by and large, the textual criticism side has backed way off. I've listened to a number of their leading people, and while I don't agree with their positions, I find them to be always reasonable and gracious and moderate. Now, are there ones out there that aren't? I'm sure there are. I haven't found them. I've listened to hundreds of hours of their lectures of different ones, Bill Mounts and Daniel Wallace and other ones like that. And these aren't the little guys. These are the main leading people. Daniel Wallace in his lecture on the Bible says, his conclusion is, on that particular lectures, is that every Christian should own 3 Bibles, and the first one he should own is the King James Bible. Now, that isn't the words of how many people would think of textual criticism being.
Yeah, well, I don't like the infighting and assuming the other person is a heretic. Never liked that. Now, I do admit in my younger years, I thought it was more of a jest that you disagree with me, you must be a heretic.
Right.
But I realized over time that these guys are serious.
Yeah, they're serious.
They're
Well,
really
there's-
serious.
there's
I'm
people-
not, as I said, look, I don't have, if you want to read whatever version you want to read, you go for it. But from my perspective, if it's different, then we're going to disagree on those points. And we're going to have to agree.
No, how would you resolve that? Going back to what we're talking about, you're back in the year 300 or 200, and you have a snippet of John, and he has a snippet of the same place in John, and someone else, and they're all going to have differences, absolutely. And I mean, now
this is a question that I struggled with.
So how do how do you resolve that?
So how I resolved it was looking at the principles. The principles in Scripture are, if we have an issue, if I think you sinned and you think you haven't, we cannot come in an agreement. We got to get a second opinion. So we go and get two other brothers, and they listen to the argument. And then when those two other brothers listen to the argument, they listen to both sides, and they say, you know what, Brent, you're in error. And I say, no, I'm not. I know he's in error. He says, well, we listen to the argument, and we believe that Michael is correct. And I'm still adamant. Then what do? Well, then they go to the whole church. The whole church listens to it, and they say, Brent, you're in error. No, I'm not. I know. The Bible in my, well, I'm using this, I'm right in my argument. And then the church says, no, you're not. Adios.
So how does that then apply to
That's a
this?
principle.
Mhm.
That's a principle.
All right, so
that
how
we
does
go
that
by.
apply to that?
So if you and I are debating and your Bible says thou shalt and mine says thou shalt not, and I'm adamant that I know it should be thou shalt not, and yours is saying thou shalt, we get a second opinion. And this is where they would say, well, this is nothing more than textual criticism, right?
Well,
And
it is
that-
textual
yeah.
criticism.
So now we're going to go get a second opinion. And if we get a consensus that everybody, it says thou shalt, whatever, what side were you on? Thou shalt.
Yeah, whatever.
Whatever. And the consensus is thou shalt. Doesn't that establish it?
Well, I don't know. Does that work with 1 John 5:7?
It has, until recently.
What do you mean? I mean, you're assuming then that there were 99% of the manuscripts had it and 1% didn't.
Not necessarily manuscripts. I mean, the church recognized it. You can see throughout the Reformation. Look at, say, Westminster's Confession of Faith, or the Baptist Confession of Faith. When they tried, you see the arguments that they make when they try to defend the Trinity. What verse do they quote right off the bat? 1 John 5:7. And this is across languages. So these brothers were fighting against, or trying to define what the Trinity is, and they're quoting these verses. So it's obviously, at least one section of history, the church came to an agreement. This is a valid verse.
What about before the Reformation, where all we have the evidence of is the manuscripts they're using, and the majority don't have the verse. So in that exact situation, if you're there in the year 1200, and you're looking at your manuscript that has it, and then everyone else that theirs does not have 1 John 5:7, you take out 1 John 5:7?
The question is, in the example that I given, what happens where we're in a situation where it's just Brent and Michael going back and forth? What do we do there? Well, we don't know.
Well, that's what I said. Look at all these others.
Yeah, but it evolved over time, correct? We figured it out, because now we brought these two other brothers over here. Then we bring, these are principles.
I understand, but that becomes a very complicated, difficult argument to make there. Because you're basically saying that we're the ones who have the actual Bible, the actual text.
Who is we?
We now, modern times, because we figured out over time. So therefore,
I think the principle is
1500,
used. I think the
1600
principle
years.
was used throughout. I don't think chaos was
But how
ever
does that
the intent.
principle could preserve 1 John 5:7 in the year 1400?
It doesn't change. The principle remains the same.
But that principle would push 1 John 5:7 out of the Scripture.
Not necessarily.
Because if we went and looked at what evidence there were, we'd have the Vulgate and maybe one other manuscript that had it, and everything else doesn't.
Yeah.
So you're looking at 11 or 12 to 2 or 14 to 2. On that principle, I would have to say 1 John 5:7 shouldn't be in the Bible in the year 1400.
Well, we need to be careful about just counting manuscripts. We have to see.
That sounds a lot like textual criticism.
That's true. I'm not denying there's no textual criticism.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, if we have an English Bible that says "Thou shalt commit adultery," and then all of our other versions, but it's more than just counting of the versions, because in that particular edition, in that particular time period, in that particular place, there might be more editions of "Thou shalt commit adultery."
Mm-hmm.
But if you take the whole church, and I don't limit the church to just English speaking,
Mm-hmm.
or just Spanish speaking, or Greek speaking. I think the whole church again, we go back to the principle. The principle has to be the guiding. Otherwise, it's just your opinion against mine. And so I would ask these brothers, what is the scriptural principle? Give me a scriptural principle. How are we to proceed when we have these difficulties?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just your opinion, your school of thought? How do I answer that? I mean, all of us agree that the Bible is our authority, right? We agree. Okay, tell me from the Bible, how do we resolve these issues? What I saw in Scripture was this very principle, that we get a consensus of the church. If we don't have a consensus, well, then we're not going to kick you out, right? Because we don't have a consensus yet. We can't make a decision. We don't have enough evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But when that evidence is established, well, now we're not going to go back and change it, because we have established it. We have resolved the issue.
That's
And
very
in this particular issue, I might get kicked out on this issue because we disagreed, and these brothers agreed with you, and then the church agreed with you, and then they kicked me out. But I might be able to find somebody down the road that agrees with me and say, "See there, I got somebody that agrees with me." But we've already established something. So,
Yeah.
but the real problem gets back, and that's what I wish all sides would get to the root problem, instead of picking at the leaves. Let's go back and see, what are we talking about when we say scriptures? What are we talking about? What are the principles in the scriptures? And I don't think that chaos was the idea. I think that harmony was the idea. I think that consensus was the idea.
So the way I look at it is, on that issue, is that the idea, the concept in the original author's minds, the concept that they were going to write something that would be transmitted perfectly, jot and tittle, verbatim, for all ages, wasn't even a concept. That wasn't even a possibility. That was like somebody someone in the year one thinking about flying in an hour to London. It's not something you thought about. It wasn't something you considered a possibility. I think that their writings, I think the way they wrote was intended to be robust and resilient to the variety that was going to inevitably be introduced immediately into the text. By very careful, sincere copyists, there was going to be this variety was going to be introduced, and I think that they wrote their texts as robust enough to overcome that. And I think that the problem we have today is we're fighting over whether one word is right or wrong, and instead of trying to understand what the text is saying, what the context means.
Let me give you an example I got from Bill Kincaid years ago that helped me. This is the idea that I've already mentioned about jot and tittle preservation. That, first of all, that's not the meaning of the verse that they're using.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the meaning. He wasn't saying the jots and tittles of the Old Testament are going to be preserved. He was saying, as an idiomatic expression, the very least commandment is going to be fulfilled. He wasn't talking about literally jots on a page. So that right off the bat is a problem using that. But the idea that we're going to preserve jots and preservation is not like Grandpa's coin collection, preserved in the vaults of First Jerusalem Bank, where every generation can go down there and see the exact coins that Grandpa had way back in the year 0. Mm-hmm. Preservation is more like Grandma's pickles. The form changes, but the essential value is always there. And so when our extreme brothers on one side or the other say, well, it's not the same, well, what do you mean it's not the same? It has the same purity. It has the same salvation message. It has the same authority. So there can be a variety in wording, but it would carry the same authority to a point, right? So we could have valid translations, true translations of the same text using a variety of words, and they would mean the same. But we could also have an erroneous translation that is not translating the meaning. Did you follow that?
I did.
Yeah.
I did follow
And so
that.
the idea is that, to me, both extremes are trying to preserve Grandpa's coin collection instead of realization.
I agree with that.
It's the character that's preserved. The Bible is always pure. It's not about word counts.
Mm-hmm.
See, the Bible was pure when it was in the Old Testament, and we didn't even have the New Testament. That was pure. And it's not purified. That's another error. We don't purify the Bible.
Well,
it's always pure. It's the character of the Bible.
It's like when missionaries, evangelists, pass out a Gospel of John, and they say, we gave the people a Bible. We gave them the Bible. Well, did you give them the Bible, or did you just give them give them John?
Yeah.
Well, they gave them the Bible. And somebody who was living in the year, say, 50, and only had the book of Galatians, well, did they have the Bible? Yes. Well, you will know they didn't, because they didn't have 66 books. Well, I think that's looking at it the wrong way, completely the wrong way. I think people that have a snippet of John chapter 3 verse 16 have the Bible. Would it be great to have they had more? Sure, absolutely. I'm sure Paul would have loved to have all 27 books like we do. Did he not have it? I mean, did he not have the Scriptures?
Did Timothy have the Scriptures?
Right.
This is problematic for the other extreme. Did he have the Scriptures?
But this goes back to what I'm saying, which I think the problem, in my opinion, the problem is that too many people are focusing, and this was me for a long time. I was one of these people, focusing on thinking that if I had the right word, if I knew what the right word was here, then I would understand what the Bible's saying. And I think we could have the originals in our hand, like people who perverted Paul's writings did, and not understand a word of what it was saying. I don't think the solution to this problem is the original text or the perfect translation or the best revision. I think that the writings are so robust that you could take a Jehovah's Witness Bible, which is, most people agree, is manipulated, and prove any doctrine to them. Show them.
I can prove any doctrine that we believe out of Jehovah's Witness Bible.
That's my point.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to emphasize their preferences, let me say.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, my point, though, is that...
Nor would I promote their addition.
But see, I've gotten to the point, right, but I don't dog it.
Well, either do I.
Right.
I believe this has been I believe that our position has always been read what you want, but in our church we're going to read this. Mm-hmm. If we can understand that yours is saying the same thing as ours, then we have agreement. Where there's any perception that they're not saying the same, then we're going to stick with this one. Mm-hmm. I think that's been our general position all the way back as far as I've been with the church at Oak Knoll.
Well, that's the general perception.
Because we're all going to read. If we're going to have collective reading, we want everybody to be reading the same thing. We don't want chaos being there. Mm-hmm. And so, if there's any disagreement, then we're gonna stick with the King James. I think that's been the general principle all along. Whether somebody has been overzealous in a point, or any of us have been overzealous at any point in history. Yeah.
Let me just say that. I don't know about anyone else.
Yeah.
I think I was overzealous and underinformed.
I think that's true of all of us. I think that's
now
true
I'm
of
still
all.
underinformed, and I'm trying to be a little less overzealous. So I got a question.
I think if anybody loves the Lord, we're always zealous, and as we mature, our doctrines mature, or maybe not our doctrines, our manner of expressions mature. Yeah. So I don't use heretics anymore.
Good. I think that's good. I actually do. And I try to, and I'm not trying to be a word Nazi about it. I don't police anyone else, but I do me. And I try not to talk about, and it's not a judgment on anyone else, but I try not to mention, to cast all these other translations in the forms of, well, that's your Bible and I have my Bible, because I think it's the wrong message to the world.
I agree.
I think that the message that we need to give to the world is there is one Bible. It says the same thing, and if you'll read it, you can find eternal life and salvation, and you'll find Jesus Christ. And I think that the squabbling over these 200 texts, let's call it, is important in its place, but it needs to stay in its place.
I agree.
That's where I'm at. I have a question for you, a different topic.
Okay.
So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you caused a big uproar on, I don't know if you knew that, a bit of a uproar over when Jesus died.
Oh,
did he
brother.
die on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday?
Oh,
Are you a Friday person now?
I'm probably a Thursday, but I can,
Thursday?
Yeah,
That's interesting.
probably.
What put you on Thursday? I say this because
I used to be a Wednesday.
Oh,
I used to be a Wednesday because I took one verse and 3 days and 3 nights. It has to be literal, 24 hours a day. Therefore, I calculated it has to be Wednesday. Then I got to Luke and reading, and it was the third day. Them guys are walking and talking with the Lord. It's the third day. Then I started going back and reading the third day. And I couldn't get this 72 hours to work for him anymore. So now and then to try to get 3 nights, it almost has to be Thursday for me. So, yeah. But I realized that when we, even in our modern vernacular, when we speak, I'm going to be gone for the weekend. Well, what does that mean? Does that include Friday?
Mm-hmm.
Well, for some people, yes. For some people, no. Another thing that helped me understand, outside of Luke was the clincher for me that really changed my mind. And then I realized I'm taking all these other verses, and just by one verse in one gospel, I'm excluding all these other verses. I thought, no, it's probably better to try to interpret this one verse with all these other ones. The other thing that helped me was the Easter issue. Because Jews to this day, some are 7-dayers, or Passover, I should say, not Easter, Passover. Passover, some are 7-dayers, some are 8-dayers. So when did they eat the Passover? Did they eat the Passover on the beginning of the day, which would have been one day in our calendar, or did they eat the Passover on the next day? So apparently, it looks like there were couple of groups there. Some were eating at the beginning of the Jewish day, and some were eating at the end of the Jewish day, which would be on different days in our perspective. So those are some of the things that helped me change my mind. So I'm not a 72-hour person anymore. Whether it can work out for Friday, if somebody could give me a good explanation for that, I'm not going to dispute it. But for me, the 3 nights, I got to get a night in there somewhere. So
So you're still trying to get in the 3 days and 3 nights as literal time, but
I'm not necessarily, but not 12 hours or 24 hours, literally. But
okay, I see what you're saying.
But I understand somebody would say, well, 3 days and 3 nights is like you saying, I'm going to go for the weekend. That could be Friday. It might not. It might just be Saturday or Sunday. Or we might even say in our modern, where are you going for Easter? Well, I'm going to go to Cancun for Easter. Well, that means a week. I'm not going to go there for a day on Easter Sunday. Easter could be a whole week. So
Right.
I recognize the flexibility in using idioms. And that was an eye-opener for me in learning other languages, the different ways that people express the same thing. So we would say, I don't have the foggiest idea. And a Pole would say, I don't have a green idea. They're using completely different words, but they're meaning the same thing, which brings us back to the original thing. You can say the same thing with different words.
Yes.
And so if you tried to translate foggiest into that idiom into Polish, it's just not going to work. Nobody's going to understand. And if you went reverse, even though if you were not so zealous about picking about exact words, you could probably figure out what I meant. I don't have a green idea.
Right.
Yeah. So, but you brought up a controversy. Why are you trying to get me into controversy? I really do not like controversy. I try to avoid it. I've been in conflict all my life.
You're saying you're trying to avoid it, and you get up and preach on it publicly. I don't know about that.
I was giving my understanding of the Scripture.
That's what I say. And then I'm like, what? I was just expressing myself. I'm innocent.
Well, some of us are innocent.
Okay. Brett Carpenter, I don't know if you remember.
I know Brett.
You know Brett. Okay.
I know Brett.
Well, he did a very extensive study on that and taught it at the Bible school we do in Mexico. Like a week long, an hour a day. So about a 7-hour course on that, on what day Christ. That's why it was interesting to me when you brought that up. Because until he did that, I hadn't really thought a lot about it. I just, like 3 days and 3 nights, it's simple math. Boom, boom, boom. It's Wednesday.
I was very adamant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I had a verse that said 3 days and 3 nights. And so I said, all right, here it is. So this has to be it. But then I was reading, like I said, I was reading Luke, and I couldn't figure out how these guys are talking with Jesus on the 3rd day.
Yeah.
If it was, how can this be? And then I started going back. Jesus himself said he's going to rise again the 3rd day. So it really, and the reason I brought that up was I was trying to, if I remember the point you're citing, I was trying to point is that we can get into our own traditional viewpoint of something and be completely wrong because we're reading the scriptures in the lens of our perception, our tradition that's been formed by our life or our tradition. And we're reading the scriptures and we read things that are not really there.
Yeah, it's called eisegesis.
Yeah. So we have to let the scriptures explain themselves instead of us trying to.
We have to read out of it, not into it.
Exactly.
That's how I explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called eisegesis when you read into the text, what you want to see there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most people have that same issue. All of it. I mean, most people. All of us have that problem.
We all do. We all have that.
We all come to the Bible with different perceptions. And I think I probably mentioned that same thing. You mentioned the word baptism, and it depends on your background, how you're going to understand that. And you need to be careful that you don't read into the text something that's not there. Allow the scriptures to reinterpret your tradition. Yeah? Tradition can be right or wrong. You just have to be flexible with the tradition. But
Correct.
You have to submit to the scriptures. Yeah.
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 And then that goes to another topic that you've been discussing. I get some of this because I deal with some topics, and then when someone else will, like you and where you're at, then people will tell me, "Hey, Brent's saying the same things you're saying," which I don't know if that's good or bad for you.
Maybe I need to rethink some
You
things.
You might want to put some thought into your criticisms that people are giving you. But on the value and the importance of context, my thing has been for a while now that I feel evangelical Christianity, which is the Baptists and the Bible churches and us, undervalue the importance of the context. And we have gotten way too comfortable with cherry picking phrases out of a text
Definitely.
Making statements on them and saying what we want to say about them.
And many times the original quoter was just saying it in jest. For example, I'll give you, you mentioned Baptist. Somebody back there jestingly said, well, John the Baptist was a Baptist, that's why I'm a Baptist. Well, that became a doctrine because all those students that he had thought that this was, written in stone. And so it becomes this doctrine when he was just, he was just playing around, And like somebody might say, well, the original says, if that came from us, nobody would think that, we studied Greek or Hebrew. We're just making a point here. What does it say in the original? Well, it says the same thing here. But then that becomes a doctrine, and we have to be aware of. And I definitely recognize that. As you get older, you learn some things.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
If you're lucky. That's like when people say you get what you pay for. My response is always, if you're lucky, you get what you pay for.
I'll tell you another thing about this controversy. I've been, fighting people on the streets, arguments all the time. And I'm not really interested in correcting other churches and what they're doing. I've realized I've got enough troubles just trying to keep my own house in order. I don't have to worry about what they're doing. And, in Poland especially, we'd have brothers, well, they do it different than we do. Well, that's for them to answer to God. What they do in their house, they're going to give an account. We just have to be right where we're doing. And I know I'm in error, and I've told the brothers lots of times, I know I'm in error somewhere. I just don't know where. I have to be in error. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah, because that's what, people are like, well, you don't think you can be wrong. Well, I do. I actually think I'm probably wrong in about 50% of everything that I think. I'm probably wrong, at least that. I would not surprise me. If you prove to me that I was 50% wrong, it wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah,
It would
I thought
me.
so.
I'm more 75%.
You're more 75% right or wrong?
Right.
Right? I think I'm 100% right, and I'm not shocked at all if I'm 50% wrong.
Yeah.
Because if I knew I was wrong, I would immediately change.
Exactly.
And then I would be right again.
Exactly. And again, we come back to attitude. What kind of attitude do we have?
Yeah.
So in the Bible issue or the church issue or whatever issue we're doing, I have a real appreciation for attitude. So if you tell me you really believe your version, great, believe it. You know, if you're going to try to prove to me something that, you know, disagrees with what I understand, then we're going to have a disagreement. But I'm happy for you that you have to. But if you tell me you believe it and then you change your own Bible, then I'm wondering, well, do you really believe it?
Right.
So I can respect somebody. And that's why I said, and I think practically we've done this, whether we've articulated it or not over time, is when we've talked to Roman Catholics and they would not read our Bible, we were more than happy to use their version. Mm-hmm. Okay, here's what it says. I can prove my doctrines right out of your Bible. I can show you that the commandments are teaching we should not have images right out of your Bible. All right, you don't believe the Trinity. I can show you right out of your Bible there is a Trinity and things like that. And so, you know, practically this is what we've done all along, even though we may not have articulated it. So,
yeah.
And I just, after years of fighting people, arguing, I'm just not really interested. And I'll listen to you, and I'll respect your opinion, but then I'm going to respectfully disagree and say, okay, we're going to disagree on this point.
Right. So you think you've changed your approach then?
Definitely changed my approach. In my younger years, which you were with me, I was very
combatant,
judgmental.
combative, I mean.
Yeah. Provocative, very.
I would say you're
condemning.
combative is how I would
have
describe it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't consider that to be a bad. I think there's a time and a place in a person's life to be combative.
I don't think I've actually, you know, said things necessarily wrong, but how I said them, I think I've changed over the years. So I'm not going to change the fact you shouldn't be bowing down to images, but how I express that doctrine, I'm more sympathetic. I understand why you're bowing down to images, because that's your tradition, and you really want to get to God, and you're interested in finding God, and so you think God wants you to bow down to images, so I respect your sincerity, your zeal. However, images don't give you faith, and that's what you've been taught. And you know you need faith to get to God. That's why you're bowing down to this image. You think the image is going to give you faith. Faith comes from the Scriptures. So previously I would have said, you're an idolater, you're wrong. Now, you're still an idolater, you're still wrong, but I understand where you're coming from, and let me help you, because you are correct in your basic understanding. Without faith, you cannot get to God. But the Scriptures say that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Faith does not come from seeing an image. So you are correct. Let's get you on track to get to God, because that's what we want. We both want to get to God. We have to get there by faith, but faith comes from a different source than you've been taught in your tradition. So if you can catch that nuance on how you're approaching, whereas before I was more beating them over the head with a stick, but now I try to understand, all right, what is your intent? What are you trying to do? You're trying to get to God.
It's like Acts 17 approach, where
Exactly.
Paul does on Mars Hill.
Exactly.
Where he acknowledges there that somewhere deep down they acknowledge these truths. They know these truths to be important.
That's exactly the
that.
point. And so I hit those points. Yeah? And so I don't argue. I'll give you another example. When we talk about the gospel is by grace without works. And so somebody would say, no, we got to have works. And they're going to go to every verse in the Bible that looks like it's talking about works. So I'm not going to argue with them. I'm just going to ask them plain up, how are those works going for you? Are you fulfilling those? And then once they realize they're not fulfilling those works that they think they got to do, then I can say, all right, maybe we need some grace, right?
Yeah.
So a different perspective. So, and in Poland, we had people that pretended to be atheists. really what they were so fed up with the Catholic Church, they were anti-Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't have any other way to express themselves than to say, I'm an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And I would talk to them. They would say things like, well, I don't need the Bible. I just live by my conscience. And I wouldn't get in an argument with them. No, you need the Bible. I wasn't going to get anywhere. And this is a change in my approach. So what I would say is, all right, you have to live by your conscience. I believe you're right. How's that going for you?
Yeah, do you?
Yeah, do you?
Do you? That's that's Romans, right? That's the Romans argument.
Then I say, so what do we do if you don't live by your conscience? Are there any consequences? And then I have an opportunity to talk to them. Whereas my old approach was I'd beat them up over there, and then I wouldn't get anywhere with
like
them.
the snarky comment of, "Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say you're a fool?" When they say I'm an atheist. Oh, I'm sorry.
I've done that too many times.
You're a fool.
I've done that. Of course, when you're out on the street, sometimes you're looking sort of provocative to get a discussion going. So
there is an element of showmanship of some sort if you want to get someone to listen to you. At least there seems to be a need for it at times.
And tact is another thing, and what works for one. And this is one of the problems with our dear brother Robert. The tact didn't always work because he would say, "Well, you did it." Well,
yeah.
There's more.
That gets you in trouble. Yeah. See, I've tried to do things I saw other people do.
And you one person can get away with it.
Like if someone's like 6'6" and weighs 300 pounds, they can get away with being snarky. But when you're 5'6", you weigh 250 pounds, and you do that, you're probably going to get laid on your butt.
Would give an example in Poland. Quite often, they would say, "No, I'm an atheist," because we're passing out tracts, and they're going one way, and we're just standing there, and they're heading somewhere, and you want to get some sort of conversation. It's, I don't want to take that track. I don't believe in God. And I would say very quickly, "Excuse me, but you're confusing me because you look very intelligent." And that would shock them. And then all of a sudden they would stop, and now I can have a conversation. And I said, "You're saying there's no God. Do you have proof of this?" "Well, because I've made that little comment about, excuse me, you look very intelligent." That paused them so we can actually have a conversation. So those types of things, that the hook, I guess, you're trying to hook them, or the bait, and get him into a conversation.
What have you found being back in the States? How long have you been here? How long since
year.
you've been here a year? How have you found people in the States vis-a-vis how they were when you were a pastor in the same church? How long ago? 30 years ago? 35 years ago?
Yeah, over 35 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Big difference in people or not?
I think my personal perception, I don't know if I could prove this statistically, but I think there's a greater ignorance of the Scriptures, or at least a respect for the Scriptures. I think people nowadays, they don't have the foggiest idea. They don't have a green idea. They don't understand any. Whereas before, you could talk. I've met people that they don't know the basic stories, Jonah and the whale, or Noah and the ark. I mean, you could just tell them basic things, and they're like, "What cartoon is that? Or what show was that? I didn't see that show." Whereas before, at least what I recall, if I can recall back then, there was at least a basic concepts of what the Scriptures were about. But today, it's like, especially amongst young people, it's just a different
A lot of ignorance now.
Yeah. I was surprised pleasantly because door knocking in Poland was like, just did not work at all. Because immediately you're a Jehovah's Witness, and they so despise Jehovah's Witnesses. So I say it didn't work. It was just very difficult.
Why did they despise Jehovah's Witnesses so much?
I'm not really sure. Because they're always banging on the door, maybe? I don't.
Would it have anything to do with their perceived unpatriotism? Is that an issue in Poland?
Possibly.
Because that was an issue in Mexico.
Possibly.
A lot of Mexicans really had a real problem with Jehovah's Witnesses because of their lack of patriotism.
I think it had more to do as they were,
Relentless.
Poland is a door knocker's haven because you can get into one building and you got all the doors right there. You don't have to walk a lot of it. You're just right there. You have a whole apartment complex.
Right.
So I think the persistently aggravating people by knocking on their doors all the time. And there may be other issues as well that are perceived. And of course, the Catholics would harp on these guys are heretics, so they didn't want they became spooked by their priest.
It's interesting how the Jehovah Witnesses have such infamy, we'll call it, such name recognition, put it on the positive side, considering how small a group they actually really are. It's kind of like the homosexuals in America. You would think that they're, 40% of the population, and they're not 1%. It's a very small amount for the noise
They're
they
very
make.
vocal.
Yes. And Jehovah Witnesses seem to be that way pretty much everywhere. They are well known for good or bad.
Yeah, because they're out banging on the doors. And that's
Have you ever
shame.
met anyone who is not a Jehovah Witness but has a positive perception of them? The way you do, because I'll talk to people who are aren't Mormons but think highly of Mormons. Or,
Mormons
or not Catholics and think highly of Catholics.
Yeah, unless it's a coworker. If it's a coworker, you would get. If it's just a generalization, probably not. But if they know a Jehovah's Witness where they work with them, they would generally tend to say they have respect for them.
Oh, they do?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the sincere Jehovah's Witness, the practicing ones.
Sure.
Yeah. So, and the same thing with Mormons.
Yeah. I just have never had that. I've never talked to anybody in that, I've talked to a lot of people in Mexico. I've never spoken to anyone who expressed a positive perspective or opinion on Jehovah's Witnesses.
Generally, I would agree with you. I would think the exception would be in certain cases where they're coworkers. They're very hard, or they're very good people in that sense. But that would be true of Catholics or Mormons or anybody really.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't mean to generalize on the entire group. It's just surprising to me because I have talked to a lot of people who have a positive perception of almost any other group.
Yeah.
Almost any other group.
Well, people don't like.
And it won't be on the group, but they'll say, I know somebody. I know a Mormon, or I know a Catholic, or I know an evangelical, or I know a Rosicrucian, or anything. And they'll say, I know them, and I don't agree with them, but they'll have a positive view of them. I've never met anyone with the Jehovah's Witnesses. It seems odd to me.
I can't say I've never, because I do have this in my head that
you have.
that somebody had worked with a Jehovah's Witness and
they had a positive
respected them, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
So,
I haven't, and that's always struck me as being very odd and concerning.
well, in Poland, the Jehovah's Witnesses are really going to these stands. They got these stands with all their books. They stand out on the street corners.
Oh, yeah? Like a kiosk type of a thing?
Yep, they're portable.
Yeah, they do that here in San Antonio still.
Oh, really?
At the Alamo, when we go out with the young people there, they're always just standing there with their books.
And are they selling them, or are they giving them away? What are they doing? How do they do that?
They can't sell them in Poland, so I don't know what they do here.
Because of the laws in Poland?
No,
How does that work? What is that like? What do you mean? The law in Poland, you can't sell things in public, or what?
No, well, you can't sell the books. You can't do it. They just won't let them do it.
Well, can anyone sell anything, or just them? How does that work?
I'm not sure what the deal is, but for some reason they don't sell it. Like they did. Remember in Mexico, they would sell them books to us.
Yeah, I used to really not like that, and now I'm thinking we should sell the tracts.
Maybe they'll take them if it's had a price.
Well, they'll read them. Yeah. You know what I mean? I jest, but at the same time, I know that we give things away and people put no value in it.
Yeah.
And I used to think, well, they're trying to make money. Then I realized what publishing cost, and that isn't even coming close to even paying the costs.
Not sure how it's going to work here in the States as far as tracts. I mean, we have our standard tracts here, and going door to door, you can either leave it on the door, or if you actually talk to somebody, you could leave it with them. But in Poland, the key was if you have a good title. If you didn't have the title, that didn't catch their attention. And
I think that's everywhere.
Yeah. The best title we had was, have you ever been to a non-Roman Catholic service? That was like, we stumbled onto that, and it was like the perfect track. Because then in the track, you just explain, here's the differences. Mm-hmm. We're going to have our priests our pastors are married, and then we give a verse. We don't have images, and we give a verse. We don't confess to the priest, and we give a verse. And then we could give salvation plan in there as well. And so it was like, hey, it's like informational. They've never been to one, so this is very interesting. And so That was a great track.
I've been wanting to, and we haven't found a way to do it. But I've been wanting to try to do something more of a digital type of a track system. I don't know that paper tracks are nearly as useful anymore as they were at some time, especially not the ones that we tend to use. I say we, I'm talking about our church.
Do you use color track?
Yeah,
Slick.
some. Like the ones we just did, the door hangers we just did, we made a invitation to the church, and it's like the front of the thing is just has a big question mark and says, "Are you free?" That's and then it opens up and just kind of talks about the church, where we're at,
Right.
which apparently is changing now. So
Yeah. There you go.
1 week after passing it out.
Right.
But yeah, you know what the church is, what to expect when you come in, that type of thing. We're going to preach the Bible. We're going to.
I'm sure it's
do
true here in
in-depth
Poland
teaching.
and here in States as well as in Poland that some of these printers, these big printers, they have all this extra paper. And they figured out that they could print tracks along their big print editions, the area that they weren't using, and they could do it at cut rate prices. And so we were getting multicolored tracks done if we would use the size that they had on their scrap portion. So we started doing that, and we got our tracks cheap, very, very cheap. And we started getting that real nice paper, color printed. So our tracks really.
I do think that
improved.
matters. If you're going to do paper, it seems to me it needs
It has to be quality.
Has to be much
You
better
can't
quality.
do paper print,
No, these little
newspaper print. I
yeah,
mean,
or
newspaper
even
print.
these Lifeway ones. I mean, I respect what they're doing, but I have a hard time passing.
You know, a
them
track I saw, and this came from that little church over there off of Bandera, Lamb. I don't think they're Baptist anymore. Freedom Baptist? Freedom.
Oh yeah, a Freedom. I think they just call it Freedom.
Yeah,
I think they have a
Freedom.
longer name, but everyone calls
Yeah,
it Freedom.
FBC, I think they were before, but anyway.
Yeah,
But
is
brother,
Freedom a church for everybody?
Something
or
like-
yeah, something.
I'm not
I
sure.
forget.
They used to be Baptist. They're not now.
Okay.
But Brother Lamb gave me a track that had actually in the track, it had various subjects, hot topics, abortion, homosexuality, whatever, and then that would take you to a video. If you went to the address, you could punch in this number or whatever, and it would take you to a video, and then a well done presentation on that particular subject. Super video, like 5 minutes, and then if you wanted more interest, if you bought this track, then you could click on a link, and it would give you churches in that area. And I think there was like when you buy these tracks, you subscribe to.
Okay.
I'd have to go back.
Oh, so
to the-
this wasn't one that his church necessarily produced.
No, it was part of
Okay.
this
Of this association
Yeah, it was
or
kind
group.
of some big association they had to have money to do this because these were professionally done, excellent, subject matter in a brief point, and then it had this map that would pop out. You could go to these churches in this area, and if you paid for it, your church would be on that area, and so they would. I thought that was a great idea.
I do see that is a, and that's
I'll have
what
to
I've
find
been
that,
wanting
see
to
if
do.
I can find that track.
That's the
somewhere.
kind of thing that I wanted to do. We talked about trying to do that, where we would give people basically a business card that had like this QR code, which has our church website on
and
it.
a web link to it
Yeah,
as well.
but it would have something like that. It would be like a topic, like say abortion or marriage or drug addiction.
Exactly,
Any of
exactly.
these, and that would take you directly to a video that would be the track. The track would
That's
be
what
the
that
video.
track is.
problem
I'll
is-
look for that track.
The problem is I'm no good on video. And so that kind of has been the
You
problem.
got to find somebody. That
I
can
gotta
do
find
it.
someone who's good on video. I'm terrible. You should have seen the first ones I tried to do. They were really bad. It's like I looked like I was made out of wood.
Pinocchio.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, it was so terrible. So terrible.
Yeah, but we used tracks to great effect in Poland. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we literally passed out millions of tracks. That first year we were in Poland, we counted them because we were, we had this goal. Of course, we were chasing the Pope around at the time, so
Oh.
he was traveling all over Poland. Got these huge crowds. And
Yeah.
and nobody, Poles weren't used to getting literature for free at that time.
No.
And they were just barely out of communism. So man, we just couldn't get them out fast enough. Then other people figured out, cell phones and politicians and English lessons, and so just everybody's passing out literature, and then it just...
Then you were lost in the deluge.
Yeah, exactly. But in the beginning, we just got out. Then over time, it became, we really have to have a good track. And so we were printing new titles every month. And then we had track collectors. They'd come by, these young people would come by, and they'd have like the old baseball cards that have a whole album. They have all our tracks. What track you got there today? Oh, I don't have that one. Can I have that one? Sure. They'd add it to their collection.
That's funny.
And we did like evolution ones, and we did the Mount Rushmore, and then we'd ask the question, years of erosion or
random erosion,
creative design, those types of questions. And that was a great one on the streets, because you could ask them just as a bait or a hook. You could ask them, do you know these 4 presidents? And then you could ask them about the question once you got their attention. That's the basic thing, getting their attention so you can converse with them. Most people on the street, they're going somewhere, they're not even paying attention to you, and they're not even looking at what you're handing out. They're just, I'm going to get point A to point B, where I got to catch a bus, I got to get there. So you got to get them out of their fog so they can actually deal with you.
What do you think is the most effective or effective, I guess would be the right word. What's the most effective way of evangelism in America today? Or at least in this sense?
Personal witness.
What we might call friendship evangelism?
Not necessarily friendship evangelism, natural evangelism.
So explain the difference there.
Friendship evangelism is actually an intent. I'm going to go make friends with you before I give you the gospel. That's an effort. You're going to go out, you meet somebody at a tea shop. I'm just going to be a friend with you. I'm not going to intimidate you. I'm just going to work on becoming a friend, and then eventually I'll get you the gospel. Natural evangelism, I go to work every day. You see me. I give you a witness. I tell you I'm a Christian. And when I tell you I'm a Christian, I want you to observe that I'm a Christian. And so that's a natural thing. You have that with your family, your neighbors, people that know you. I think that is the most powerful witness, because you get 2 aspects. You get the preached word, where you actually give your testimony. Then you have the living word in your life. And when you get them 2 together, that is a strong argument. People can't deny it. If they see you preaching on the street, and they can say, oh, that's another television evangelist, he's a hypocrite, he doesn't know you, he can just reject the message because he doesn't know you. Natural evangelism, they know you. They respect you. They might not agree with your preaching, but they can't deny that you are a Christian. And really, that's how I got saved. I got saved because I worked with 2 Baptist girls, 16, 17-year-old girls at Hardee's Hamburgers. And they were different, maybe even odd from my perspective as a teenage hippie. But they had something that I didn't have, and I knew they had something. And they hadn't preached to me yet. And then when the opportunity came, they did preach to me, and I put 2 and 2 together, and I said, this is it. And that is a powerful witness. I don't think that is the only way to evangelize, but I think it's very powerful. I think that's the most powerful. When you get the spoken word and the living word, it's very hard to deny. They begin kicking against the pricks. When they have one or the other, okay, he's just a good guy. He doesn't relate what this is about, or he's just another scam artist. But when they get them together, boy, that's a powerful witness. And I think if you recollect, a lot of people get saved that way.
Yeah.
Because they have this testimony. And I personally think that if more of us Christians would not only live the life, but at least give a verbal testimony, actually preaching to our coworkers, our neighbors, or whatever, let them know that we're Christians and explain the gospel to them. Not force it on them necessarily, but use natural opportunities. And I think that's a powerful, powerful witness. Not to the exclusion of other ways of evangelizing, but that's just a powerful way. And
on the with this pandemic that's gone by, do you think that the church has learned anything from that? Do you think your church has learned anything from that?
We had outdoor meetings and we had a lot of visitors, so that was a revelation. So we're trying to incorporate once a month outdoor meetings. We have our meetings out there in the parking lot.
How does that work?
We
I mean,
we build.
I don't mean. I mean, how does it work out? Is it working?
Yeah,
Is it
we
something you
get
like
people.
doing?
Yeah, people. I mean, it's not commodious in that sense, but people will stop by, and they'll sit. They don't. I guess they don't have to get out and rub shoulders with anybody, and they'll sit in the parking lot. I don't know how it would work during the summer when it starts getting hot, but
Do you plan on doing it in the summer?
we're gonna try. We're gonna try once a month. Maybe.
See if you melt.
See if we melt. Yeah. Of course, it's hard for Lindell to do the platform, so if he,
Well,
if he's
you could have made it a little more commodious.
that's true. We could put him on the ground.
You didn't have to make it quite so dangerous. I saw the first attempt. They didn't have a banister.
Right, yeah.
Telling the 80-year-old man, "Get up there." He used to get a horse whip.
Somebody was reading Whitfield's biography and saw his big old thing that he built and said, "Let's build a Whitfield one. Get him up there 30 feet in the air."
Tell him you want him to lean over the banister when he's preaching. Like,
Oh, Billy Sunday,
Yeah.
kick his leg up there. Yeah, but that was interesting, and we did have people.
but
come
what
out
I mean,
because
as far as like the pandemic, what if like they said, the big one hits, and what if we get a one that actually really is serious? And I don't mean to minimize those that died from COVID, but in the grand scheme of history, it actually has been not nearly as bad as it might.
I disagree with the lockdown personally. I don't
What
think we
if
should have
you
locked
actually have bodies lined up in the streets?
Well,
Would
they
you still
did,
disagree?
and I think
No, we had the same
this-
number of deaths. In
not
this
this
one?
time. No, not
right.
this
Okay,
one. But
I'm sorry.
historically, and the ministers like Luther and even Spurgeon or different ones, you just minister. You just minister. You're in God's hands. You just have to minister.
So you would still think people should go to church, a
Yeah,
church meeting,
I thought the lockdown was.
even if it were, say, 10 times more serious than what this was. You still think people should go into a church building together?
I would say yes. Yeah,
And-
I'm not a medical doctor, and I
So-
can't speak to that. But I just don't see how the lockdown actually helped personally. I think you're just delaying the spike. That's what I think has happened. You just delayed the spike.
There's
Eventually,
certain
you're gonna-
evidence to that, right? Because
Eventually, you're going to have to get out, and then there's going to be that
the countries
spike.
that have locked down some of the ones that have locked down the most are now locked down again as of today and yesterday. Whole countries now that were locked down, they came out, now they're locked down again.
And I don't want to. I don't have the authority to speak on that.
Sure.
But if you're asking me my opinion, I don't think the lockdown was the right way to go.
But
I think precautions can be made, but I'm just not convinced the lockdown was the way to go. And reading historically, they just ministered and they put themselves in God's hands and they ministered to people that had these plagues and different things.
well, I can understand. To me, and I'm not arguing a side. This is devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone that listens to some of the stuff I do kind of has an idea of where I stand on the political side of this. But just as devil's advocate, I can see a case to be made, and I as a pastor would agree that ministers should do just as you're saying. But I can also see a case to be made that it seems foolhardy to hold indoor meetings or any kind of meetings really, where you're in close proximity if there is a raging pandemic going on. And I think it's easy to say right now, well, we look at it and go, well, the overall death count in America is actually the same as it was the year before. People died from different things. There's less car wrecks, more of these other deaths. But it wasn't where we're talking about 10 times the death count at all. But what if it were? I mean, if it were, would you still think that the average Christian should go to a meeting?
Because I don't have.
And the consequences be damned.
I don't know if I would use the word be damned, but I understand the meaning. I would have to go back and see what they did. I think they were still meeting. It may have been out of ignorance in those times, like Luther and others, but I know they did minister, so I would have to look.
Yeah.
And I just sort of roll with the flow on this.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever whatever works out, and we'll just deal with it from there. But I personally don't think.
Now,
it
what
was
if
the right
what if
idea.
the state impedes, like they do in California? What do you think you do as a pastor
I thought them
there?
churches that stood up against it were right.
Would
I
you
think
would
they
you do
should
that?
have. We didn't. We sort of
You guys you complied, didn't you?
we did the best to comply. It just we walked a tightrope. We were trying to do the best we could to have meetings and still not aggravate local government. We were trying to comply. So then we came up with that parking lot meeting. But I think they were shutting down the parking lot meetings out in California, which doesn't even make sense to me. So I thought the churches that actually stood up to it were right in that. And if you ask me personally, I would say we probably should say, no, we're going to meet. Because what happened this pandemic, there was no real authority. It was, even those that were supposedly speaking with authority, they'd say one thing one day and then another thing the next day. So
It was very fluid.
yeah, it was just like crazy. So, yeah. And then the inconsistency, you can get 100 people at Walmart, but you can't have 100 people at church in a parking lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, there were certainly. I would hope that after all this, that everyone has learned something. Now
Yeah.
that's probably being too optimistic.
I was shocked by the amount of abject fear injected into people in a very short time, and how controlling it became.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And so I had a new perspective of Revelation.
Yeah,
I could see how things could be manipulated and controlled very easily. I did not understand until this pandemic. I always wondered, how are they going to get people to do this?
the funniest thing I saw in this entire time, and it was just, to me, was hilarious. We went into like one of these frozen yogurt places, like four of us, two couples. We were in there, and it was right at the beginning before masks were mandatory, so most people weren't. Well, this family comes in. It says man, a woman, and their little, I don't know, say 10-year-old kid or 8-year-old kid, and they're wearing full gas masks. Not, I mean, like, sealed around the face with the thing. They're in there, right? And they're ordering frozen yogurt. And I'm thinking, what are you going to do with that? Well, they went outside, right outside the door, took off the gas mask, and ate the frozen yogurt. I'm thinking, you guys got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
I can understand being that fearful, but I'm not going and ordering frozen yogurt if I'm that scared.
Yeah.
Some guy over there with his hand serving it, handing it to you. It's crazy.
I think practically what would happen is you would let each individual make their own decisions. We're going to have meetings. If you're concerned, okay, stay home. We'll try to accommodate, which we did. We had video set up, but we're going to have meetings.
And how has it worked out since then? Now you guys are pretty much back, right? 100%? I mean, as far as the church, I don't mean all the people.
We're open for everybody, but everybody hasn't come.
That's what I mean. So you guys are you still doing distancing with chairs and stuff, or are you back?
Nope, we're back to normal.
Just normal.
We got the regular Lord's Supper again. We got out of the wafers. We had the
we use those. We've been using those for years.
We had special packed
the ones where you pull up the little tab. We've been using those for years.
Man.
I love those. I don't like people touching my food.
We'd have about 5 or 6. Can somebody help me open this thing?
Yeah, they're a pain. Yeah. Well, we started doing. I started doing that like 10 years ago, and we would just take and put the bread, break it up beforehand with like sanitized hands and everything, and one person, and put it in the little cups, and we'd pass out that like we pass out the juice. That's how we did it.
Yeah.
But that's just because I don't want people touching what I'm putting in my mouth.
You wouldn't survive Poland. 1 cup.
I lived in Mexico.
Yeah, that's true. One cuppers.
Mexico, they go in and they're like digging around.
I want that big one.
And they get,
Take a bite and taste it. No, not that one. Give me another one. Double dippers.
And my granddad was 1 cupper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 1 cuppers were. I'd always try to sit in the front if they're going to.
You want to be the first one?
I want to be the first one.
I'll always agree to 1 cup if we all agree. I go first.
Hey,
well, see, that's what Catholic church is. I went with a friend to a Catholic church on a Sunday. That's still what they do.
Yes, they do.
They, the priest or the bishop, I don't know who's doing it, but they have a rag and they least they wipe it.
Yeah.
And they just keep turning it.
Yeah.
You know,
They
in
do.
Mexico, they don't actually drink from the cup in Catholic churches.
Yeah.
Do you know
No.
that? No, they
No,
don't.
no, no. They sprinkle on the wafer.
Yeah, they kind of dip.
Oh,
And I
yeah,
don't even
dip-
know
or
that
the-
there's anything in it because I've been there and I've actually gone up and the wafer comes up dry. So it's just, it's theater.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the cup on the normal mass.
Yeah.
And they just put it in the cup
That's fine.
and give it to you, the wafer.
Yeah, it reminded my Luther days of that little wafer thing. Ah, interesting. Deja vu.
Yeah. You guys didn't do the ones with fish cutouts like they did in Leon?
With Pepsi?
Yeah.
Oh, the things we do.
Yeah. But no, what my question was, though, was like, so you guys are back, but then what has been the response as far as people returning?
Slowly.
Well, y'all have also a lot of older people.
Yeah, that had an effect as well.
But they are the older people.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure any of them.
Everybody's older than you, son. So, yeah, that has an effect as well. So, but I think as people get a little bit more confident, a lot of these people are getting the vaccination, so they feel more confident. I think with time.
Have you been vaccinated?
I had COVID, so I didn't get the vaccine.
Oh, you have the natural vaccine.
I have the natural.
That's right. I heard almost all of you guys got COVID.
The Nelda's funeral.
Ah!
Well, see, everybody from our church that went never got it.
See,
Yeah.
That's so.
No one from our
Really?
people that went from our church didn't get it.
it's that West tradition. Okay, we're all going to sit in families. 35 seats. Whereas before, we had like 4 seats, to a family. But no, they got 35 chairs for a family. So. But yeah, it went through us pretty quick. But fortunately, nobody.
No one got real
Janice
ill?
had the injection, but she's always had lung issues. So my doctor, when I got COVID, said, "Listen, if your wife gets it, have her come here. We will get her out there, and we will get the thing that President Trump had, whatever
Okay.
that. I don't know what you call it, but she had that immediately, so that helped her. Why they don't give that to everybody, I don't understand. But I'm not a medical doctor.
I'm not either. Who is it that we've had one person, I think, Marco, who got really ill from it.
Assuming he actually had it.
Yeah, we're assuming he had it.
Because he got one test that says the least accurate test that says that he did have it. He went and got 2 more from the ones that they say are more accurate, and they said they didn't.
It was weird
Like he
because
had all the symptoms of having COVID,
yeah.
but there are also symptoms of having the cold.
Did he lose his taste and smell?
No.
he didn't lose his
I lost
taste.
my taste and smell.
How was that? Did you get it back yet?
Yeah, I got it back. It was really weird. I was working at Wells Fargo on site, and because I'd been exposed to COVID, I was required to go get a medical test.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had what I thought was allergies. My eyes were red.
Mm-hmm.
They were, allergic type thing. So I agreed to go to the doctor. I was feeling a little bit tired, but I thought it was allergies. But I had a tension knot in the middle of my back, and I couldn't work it out, man. Janice would rub my back, and it just wasn't working. I put Bengay, nothing was working. So I thought, all right, I'll go get my test, and while I'm there, I can ask the doctor about this tension knot. And Corey had told me about the test he got. He said, yeah, they scratch your eyeballs. That's when they were doing that deep thing with them long Q-tip things. They'd stick up there and scratch your eyeballs with it and then pull it up. I was thinking, man, I don't want to do that. But here they just put it inside the nostril. And so I'm waiting for the doctor comes in, and she comes in and says, Mr. Riggs, hate to inform you, but you have COVID. That was the biggest shock to me. I've got COVID. I'm feeling fine. But then I asked her about this. I said, well, Doc, doesn't even have anything to COVID. I got this knot in my back. She said, no, that's COVID. And she made me stand up. She said, you don't even have a knot. You just think you do. But it's COVID.
Really?
Yeah. There was no knot there. It was just felt, I don't know if the nerves or what it is, but
Wow.
that wouldn't let me sleep. So that's what made me tired. So I'd take 2 Tylenol, and it would knock it down, and then that would get me to sleep. But then after 2 hours, I'd have to get
You
up.
thought you had it again. So it was all in your head.
No, the pain was there. The pain was real.
Yeah, but was the pain actually originating from that spot, or was it in your mind?
No, it's the nerves, or
Okay.
something to do with
The nerves at that spot.
That nerve in that spot made me.
But there
feel
was
like
no muscular tension.
there was no muscular tension. I
Okay.
mean, she actually poked around on me. I could feel it when she was poking. It wasn't comfortable, but she said, "No, there's no knot here. You don't have any muscle knot. It's just COVID." And she said that immediately without even inspecting me. She said, "No, that's a COVID symptom."
Wow.
And then I would go every morning, get me a dill pickle and see if I could smell it and taste it. And then at night I would use Vicks just to make sure I could breathe at night. That is a weird feeling. Open up that Vicks jar and you can't smell anything.
Can't smell anything?
But you can feel it. It burns.
Yeah.
It burns, but you can't smell anything.
That is weird.
That was weird. And then I sat there and ate jalapenos. Say, I can't taste it. And I'm just sweating. I said, "This is great, man." So, yeah.
That's funny.
But,
So you haven't. So yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what we would do. Our position was we didn't have a choice. So we're at the YMCA. They shut down.
mm-hmm.
So then we were shut down, and we didn't really ever have a choice. As soon as they opened up, we went back, and we went back normal
Yeah.
because the YMCA wasn't there policing us. They have some guy that
we were
opens
kinda
up.
normal even during the whole thing. Honestly, we weren't.
We were here at the house, yeah,
Oh,
and
okay,
working.
during
But
the
I'm saying
house,
when the
yeah.
when the church when the YMCA was shut, we just did virtual. That's the only choice we really had. No one was going to rent to us in that time, and we weren't going to go rent a place. So
Just
we
for-
just because then we're you can't do that. So, but as
Well,
soon
I
as
think
they went back, we just went back.
I think
normal,
in the
chairs
beginning, when they
together.
first came out with the guidelines, we really thought it was just going to be a 2 or 3 week shutdown.
I
And
did
so,
it.
So we said, okay, we'll have random Bible studies around the city. So we did that. I think 3 or 4 people opened their homes, and then we had smaller meetings. And we did that for a few weeks. Then they shut us down completely. So then we went to Zoom meetings or video meetings. I'm not sure what
Yeah.
application we used. We went to that. That worked out surprisingly well because, with our open meetings. So then also during that time we videoed the preaching. So we would have maybe 2 preachers and a song leader. So there were maybe 3 or 4 people at the church and where we would tape. And then at night we would have a Zoom meeting, which surprisingly went well. Then we started, and I don't remember all the time frames, but then we started the parking lot meeting, and we'd put up a big sign, this Sunday we're going to be in the parking lot, and we'd have people drive in and actually listen and have visitors.
I did a Zoom revival conference. Preached a Zoom revival recently. I like that. That's the way to preach in Mexico.
Yeah, you don't have to travel.
No,
Just
have to
preach.
travel.
Yeah.
And then people are all there, and you can talk to them, and they can talk to you. You talk back and forth.
Yeah.
I was like, that's not too bad.
Well, that's what I do at work every day.
Yeah.
I'm on Skype.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Zoom, but Skype. So
With just one person or with
no,
a
our
big
whole
group?
team.
Oh, wow.
The whole teams. We're
Yeah,
Well,
I liked that. And we did that, and I thought, that's not too bad. I got to do it right here. I sat here right here. Of course, I have the equipment, right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that was pretty cool. And what I do is I have a teleprompter. Well, I put the teleprompter like where you're at with the video signal from them coming in. So I'm looking right at the camera behind that,
Yeah,
but at them.
that helps.
So it doesn't. It's not like this, right?
Yeah.
Where they're looking and they're seeing the
Yeah.
top of my head.
I had to try to do a video like that, and you end up
Yeah, you're looking down.
and they're seeing the top of your head
Yeah.
instead of.
Where this way, I'm looking. My monitor is right in front of the camera, so I'm looking right at them. Piercing. I try to be piercing. But yeah,
No, but evangelism in a pandemic, I would agree with Luther and some of these others that I read that we still have to minister somehow.
I would
And
too.
I think let each individual decide if they want to come to the meeting.
I would
warn,
too on
warn
that.
them of the dangers. To let them know, I mean, this is serious, but we're going to continue to have meetings.
And then when they slap $500,000 fine, like they did at churches and
Well, they would never get it from us.
well, you'd basically be losing your building, your land, and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happened with John MacArthur is a big enough name, and I think he got away with it.
Yeah.
But no other church in California that I know of got away with it.
Yeah. Well, they slap fines on them. Doesn't mean they have to pay them, but
they're going to pay a lot of money not paying them.
Yeah.
You don't just not pay them.
Yeah.
They're going to have to hire lawyers, and they're going to have to fight it.
Yeah. That didn't make sense to me, but seemed inconsistent. But
yeah, but that's neither here nor there. The point I'm looking at is, what do we do if this actually happens again? And say more seriously, it's easy to say, well, we should keep having meetings. That's difficult, and I'm not sure how.
I think what would happen practically is if it was really serious, your meetings would be very low.
Yeah.
So you could.
And what did you think of virtual meetings? Is that do you think that's actually a viable path? I mean, is there anything wrong scripturally with a virtual meeting to you?
Not necessarily wrong. There is something about being in person. I don't know how to put a finger on it, but we did have good virtual meetings. I'm not saying. I mean, it was good fellowship in that sense, but you are separated, so just. Maybe the novelty of it was different. I don't know how to put my finger on it, but there's something about just being in atmosphere without being behind the camera. That a type of synergy, I guess would be a word, that you would have that you don't get through a visual medium like that.
Right.
The atmosphere. And even at Wells Fargo, they mentioned this. Our meetings are just not the same as where they're in person. So there is something there that's missing.
Sure, there's a.
You can
one is you're losing your third dimension. I mean that's a huge thing. You're only seeing things two-dimensionally.
Yeah, and you don't get the side fellowship after you get off the meeting. You don't have people communicating because everybody's just clicking out.
Yeah.
So you lose that. So there's something that's lost in those type of things. Not that they can't be used to great effect. Obviously, we did. So, and we had great meetings.
I don't think anyone in our church liked them at all. I don't think anybody liked them. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's a couple people I think liked that they didn't have to go there to be there.
Yeah, because they don't have to put their picture in. They just put their little puppy up there. And
do what the kids do on Zoom in the schools. They put on their screen name on Zoom. You can type in your own screen name, and they put connecting ... And then they would just put something black in front of the camera, so the teachers all thought they were having connection problems, and the parents thought they were logged in, and the kids weren't doing either one.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming in and talking to me.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Very much appreciate it.
Went by fast.
Look forward to seeing how things go for you here.
Looking forward to this summer.
Yeah. Be interested to see how the evangelism plans go for you guys.
Yeah. Well, we're going to start next Saturday, our first operation.
Where are you going to do it? Right there in the same neighborhood?
No, because we pretty well.
I was going to say, because they're going to start thinking you guys are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, do you know if Ferguson Map Company is still in existence? I tried to find them online.
I don't know what Ferguson Map Company is.
About Mapco. They were off of Sunset. You don't know.
I have no idea.
They were the old green maps when we didn't have GPS. Had the beautiful city maps. You could open them up, and each page had a section of town, real clear.
Oh, yeah. It was a book.
Yep.
It was a book.
A spiral book.
And you could get in, zoomed in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking for, I want to get a big map of San Antonio so we can start marking off the streets.
Mike Pemberton gets them. He orders them. You can send them your coordinate. You send them a coordinate and tell them what size around that, and they send you a laminated map.
Okay, I'll have to talk to Mike.
Yeah, talk with Mike. He does that.
I seen the big, like 4 foot by 5 foot city maps laminated, but you have to order them online, and I really want to look at it to see.
Well, this is probably online. I imagine. Yeah. I would imagine even if they're next door to you, they're online.
That's probably true too. Today's generation.
Yeah, today's world. That's how it is. But yeah, looking at that.
Everything's online.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I enjoyed it.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in.
All right.
Appreciate you driving out here. We're a long ways out. I'm always happy when someone's willing to do it.
Have you come over sometime. We actually got a house now. So
nice. Congratulations on that. Very good.
Got some furniture in it now finally, so actually sit down and eat.
That's like you.
Yeah, I just bought a house about a month ago or so.
They wanted to send me home from work and said, "We want you to work from home." I said, "I don't have any furniture." "Well, can't you get a table?" "Well, yeah." So I went down to Home Depot and got one of them plastic white.
Uh-huh.
So I'm working off this white table. And Janice says, "That would be good for a dining room table in the meantime," because everything was backed up with COVID.
Yeah.
We ordered furniture, but we had to wait 3 months to get
Yes.
furniture. So
Everyone's using this COVID, I think, as an excuse. I get a lot of that, right? Oh, well, it's COVID. It's going to take longer. It's like, oh, give me a break. I work every day. Give me a break.
not everybody was working though.
No, not everybody was. We were. I was happy. I thought, I have a bunch of stuff I need to get done. I'm going to get 3 or 4 weeks. I knew I knew. My prediction to Terry and to the podcast audience was the lockdown was going to last a very long time. Because I know my perspective is the government knows how to turn things on. It does not know how to turn things off.
Yeah.
And once you start something, who's going to say it's safe? It's easy to say it's dangerous because there's no liability there. Mm-hmm. Anyone to come out and say, all right, it's safe, you can go out. Well, one person dies, and they're on the chopping block. Anyways,
That's one of the reasons I said we probably shouldn't have locked down.
I didn't think we should either, because there was no end game to that, and there was
When they were in the
and there was a
beginning, when they were
tremendous
talking about
down-
2 weeks to let them catch up, I thought, okay, yeah, maybe, but
No, see that to me comes from not people that thought that way. That's because they don't understand how free markets work.
yeah.
Free
The
markets
census-
don't work by locking down. That's not how they work.
The Census Bureau, I was working. Man, I didn't go back to work until August, maybe July, and we were on split crews because they had all these shower curtains dividing up the room. I thought, what in the world?
Dumb. It's so dumb.
Crazy.
You want to know what's real dumb? Was you go into the GC's offices where we work in construction. You go into the superintendent's office, and they'll be sitting here like this with computers, and they'll have a piece of plexiglass about this big hanging off of strings.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
You guys must think the coronavirus is the
perception.
dumbest virus on earth.
It's like TSA at the airport. It's all, they ain't stopping the real guy, the real criminals, but they give you a perception of security.
Yeah.
So that all that money and
That's
all
what
that
that
wasted
is.
time and
It's
the same thing.
it's all a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, at construction sites, we deal with it all. And it's fine. It's gone away. As soon as they lifted mandates, I thought it would take longer, but they...
Well, mostly the good thing about construction is that it's predominantly conservative.
Yeah,
It's not very liberal, that whole industry.
yeah, it's true. Here in Texas, the superintendents are mostly rednecks, gun-toting.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not Bible thumping. No.
That's what I've noticed, that we don't have that anymore, really.
Mm-hmm.
My perception.
Yeah.
Of course, I've been overseas for a long time, so I was just shocked about meeting people that never owned a Bible in
Yeah.
America.
That is interesting.
Well, what are you talking about? Where
people
where
don't-
am I at? I'm
But
not
people
in
don't own
Poland.
books anymore. I mean,
Well,
that's
true,
part
too.
of that also,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, they just don't. Books are on their way out for the most part. Yeah.
It's like that priest came up to me. We had that, I was telling you about that Mount Rushmore sign.
Mm-hmm.
And this group of priests were walking by and they saw it. And one of them just red-faced anger, just out of the blue, just shot. And I hadn't said anything to him. We were just passing out tracts with our little sign. And, you don't really believe in a literal 7-day creation, do you? I said, well, yeah. Technically 6, but yes, I understand what you're meaning. Why are you upset? You can't believe. I said, well, why can't I believe that? He said, because no scientists believe in a 7-day creation. I said, well, that's not true either, but I understand your point. You're probably right. The majority of scientists don't, but I still don't understand why you're angry and why you think this is a valid point. Well, we got to go by this. You ever heard this term? We got to go by the science.
Yeah.
We got to go by the science. I said, are you a Catholic priest? Of course, that was sort of facetious because he was in his priestly garb.
Mm-hmm.
He said, of course I am. I said, well, I just need to know if you're a practicing Roman Catholic priest. Of course I am. I said, well, I can appreciate that. But don't you teach the virgin birth? Yeah, of course, the Holy Mother Mary. I said, what scientists can you find would agree with that? So if you can believe the Bible on that particular point, why can't I believe the Bible in Genesis?
Uh-huh.
And you know what? I didn't convince him. I mean, he wasn't persuaded.
Right.
But at least he did acknowledge
That there was an inconsistency.
there was an inconsistency, and that I had a valid point. That if I can believe in the virgin birth against science, then I can believe in creation against science. So he actually calmed down, which I was grateful.
That's one of those cases where a kind answer served you well.
A soft answer turns
Yeah.
away wrath, and that's what I've learned over the years. I don't have to be belligerent, or I got away from Bible thumping, really, thumping people over the head and saying I'm right. And that's what this Bible issue is a lot, just thumping each other on the head instead of actually trying to resolve the issue.
Yeah.
I think if calmer minds would sit down, we could resolve the issue. But it's so heated now, you just can't. You can't get anywhere. I think Bill says something like, you don't wash your windows in a hurricane, even if they are dirty.
Yeah.
You can't do anything like that. So,
But going back to my point on that, I made is that the majority of the vitriol, in my opinion, is coming from the KJV only camp nowadays.
yeah, because they're the most zealous.
They're the majority. I find that the textual critics have backed way, way, way off.
Yeah.
And they have moderated their position even on the Textus Receptus, and have acknowledged that many of the readings of the Textus Receptus are at least on par, if not in times superior.
Yeah. And then,
Which is far away from where they were when they started, which was that it was trash and that this new text was the only one that was any good.
and then unfortunately, for very good Baptists, a lot of these King James only are independent Baptists, and they have their own characteristics about we're right on everything. And so their arguments, unfortunately, because it goes against their stated belief that the scriptures have authority, but a lot of times it's just their argument has the authority. And if I can yell louder and make you look like an idiot, then I prove your point. So
They also are many of them, not all of them, but many of them, the ones I've dealt with, are seriously underinformed on simple matters, just like, for instance, what you found out, and that's what I found out. When you start translating from one language to another, all of a sudden you realize this is a very complicated issue. This is a very complicated issue. It's not as simple as it seems if you only know one language.
And my personal experience, when I actually sat down trying to figure out how I'm going to do this, and I began realizing even in the Bible there's variety. And then in order to defend my position, because we were getting hammered at that time because we weren't translating the King James, we were just updating, and I was just trying to defend my position. So I found things like Jesus in the temple in Luke 4 reading the book of Isaiah, and it doesn't match any manuscript on the planet Earth, not in English, not in Hebrew, not in Greek, not in Polish, not in Spanish. So either if it's got to be jot and tittle the same, then either our Isaiah is wrong or what Jesus was reading was wrong. And then they would go into these elaborate things. Well, he really wasn't reading all that. And I said, well, what about the Philip and the eunuch? The guy's reading Isaiah, and then everything's backwards in Acts than it is in Isaiah. And so I realized, okay, either it became obvious to me that we just cannot know what the original is. Because what was Philip reading, it's not like anything we got in Isaiah. So
we can't, I would say that we can't know what if we're at the level of, like you say, the jot and tittle what the original is. I think we have the original in the sense that we have exactly what was written. Now, whether it's the same exact words, if it's the same word order, that's not my point. My point is we have what the apostles wrote. We have their message.
I would say we have the original authority.
But don't you think we have what they actually wrote? I don't mean what words are written on a piece of paper. I mean the message they were communicating. Or do you think we could have a whole different message and it would still...
No. But it can't be jot and tittle. There's no way. It can't be word counts. It can't be word order.
But see, my view of it is that doesn't matter. I don't think it mattered to them. I don't think it was...
Well, obviously they translated different. That's what I noticed right off the bat.
Yeah.
Matthew translated one way, Mark another, John another.
Mm-hmm.
And so that immediately told me that a variety of translation can express the same message. That's what it taught me. Yeah. So my battle isn't over words that have the same meaning. My battle would be, okay, this is actually saying something different, or this is missing. What do we do here?
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been the issue, really.
See, I don't have a battle over any of those things anymore. I just don't. I'm just done with all of that myself.
Yeah. Well, if you're gonna have responsive reading in the church, then practical matters.
I
You
mean,
can't have people reading.
well, you
different-
can if you consider that they did responsive reading when they didn't even have printed editions, and they had a lot of differences then. Now, I don't do responsive reading personally, but I get your point. But I look at it and say, well, before the printing press, they did responsive reading, and you know that we know for a fact that they didn't have anything similar. Even if they had the same quote unquote version, there was differences in what they were reading. To me, that's just not
Well,
an issue.
I would. My argument on that was, I don't think, despite the chaos was not the intent.
I agree with that.
They weren't trying to get
I think
chaos. Whereas
transmission and preservation
today
was
the
intent.
thinking is, if we get more, well, they're not going to use the word chaos. If we get more variety, then we can have a better understanding, because they don't believe you can get the understanding in one text. We need the variety, so they're pushing for variety.
In the translation or in the textual
in-
criticism?
No, in translations.
Oh, in translation.
Yeah, maybe not in one particular translation, but the variety of translations out there will give us.
So you would say that we need to take the translated English translation as that's the authority, and
I think the
basically
intent is
burn
one
the Greek.
principle good one, with no slighting of the other ones. But we would have one principle one that we could all appeal to, and say, okay, here, if there's a difference.
And so your position would be that there is no lack of anything in the King James Bible. There's no place where it might be translated where you look at it and go, they translated it well, but incomplete because translation is imperfect.
I would say there would be no erroneous translation where they would teach error.
But do you think there's erroneous translation like in the NIV or the NASV
I
or
would
the
say
ESV?
the fact that they did not translate certain things, then that would.
So that they omit a verse
Why
or
they
omit a
why they
phrase?
left it. Why they left it out? I would have that problem with that. Yeah. I could. Why would? Again, it's the what is the word? It's the principles involved. It's the rejection of the principle that I have a problem with. That the King James added that verse or whatever. It doesn't have to be the King James, because it could have been the Gdansk or the Spanish or whatever.
Right.
That text receptus added that verse. Therefore, they are wrong. We are presenting the truth without it. That's my problem. Because obviously, I've had King James Bibles that my grandkids tore out all of 1 John. So now what am I going to do?
Right.
Is the King James lacking 1 John? No.
Well, and then you have Bibles like Luther's that doesn't have 1 John 5:7, or didn't. Erasmus's first couple didn't have it. And so what does that mean?
Yeah,
That's my problem. I don't
focus on the individual, because I'm looking for the consensus.
and again,
And
I
the
don't think
churches.
that, right. I think that the argument is misframed in that way when we say that, when we look at it saying, you added, you're wrong. You took away, you're wrong. I don't think that is at all how it should be considered or thought of.
Right.
And this again is not that I'm not partial actually to modern translations. I don't prefer them at all, if you want to call it that. I don't. I like the King James Bible. I agree with their choices. For whatever that's worth, I don't think it's worth a whole lot, but I agree with their translation choices and things. I'm just off the wagon of arguing against these other translations.
Well, there's on an individual basis, I'm not worried about it, because I'm going to, okay, what part do you believe? Let's go from there. On an individual basis, but on a church basis, well, we got to make a choice.
Sure.
So,
And interesting, like you pointed out, the plurality of churches still choose to standardize on the King James, at least for their liturgy.
I think even the those on the other side at least recognize the principle because they put standard on their Bibles, English Standard Version or American Standard. They understand the principle,
Sure.
and they acknowledge, well, the King James translator, and they emphasize out of many good ones, they weren't. And see, I don't criticize. I'm not going to criticize the English Standard Version or the New American Standard. I'm not going to say your Bible's an error or you're a heretic or that's heretical or you're going to be in false doctrine. I'm just going to say where there's differences, I'm going to stick with the standardized text. And so if we don't agree on that, then we're going to have to go to where we agree. So
Sure.
I'm not going to make a big issue of it, whereas I might have when I was younger.
Well, I would have
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I regret that to a degree. I do.
Well, it's because it was my misunderstanding of what was preserved.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I saw these different words, it presented a problem. But then over time, okay, wait a minute. Here Matthew, Mark, and John are choosing different words and saying the same words, having the same meaning. Then, so I think this is Wendell's point. He just got to the place that why does he have to go to all these other translations when the King James is saying the same thing? So I'm just going to stick with what I've had. And so that was his point from way back was, okay, whatever you have, well, that's fine for you, but I don't see any reason why I have to change. What's wrong with what I got? And then that problem I had in the early days was I was hearing these same arguments that I had heard from the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that progression I've already spelled out that, in the beginning they were trying to interpret, and now they're trying to say, well, that's not the original. And that was a big shift. And then I heard it from evangelicals that were using the same argument, and that just gave a shock to me. Wait a minute, something's wrong here. So, of course, that opened my ideas about, the preserved original or the preserved English. How do you define preserved? You go through the Bible and it seems like it's a living book.
Yeah.
And it seems like they were editing even. So,
well, a lot of Christians for many years didn't have a book.
yeah.
At best, they had some snippets.
Or, well,
I'm
what they
saying
did
them
what they did
personally.
have was the official version in the temple.
Yes, but
Or
I'm
the
saying them
synagogue, I should
officially,
say.
the idea, and even that one would be incomplete, at least up to like the year 90.
And probably what happened is, if you and I had a dispute with our snippets, we'd go down to the synagogue and say, all right, oh yeah, you copied wrong or I copied wrong.
But going back, I think that the source of doctrinal difference isn't a difference in any translation or any manuscript. I think it's not understanding what the context is saying.
Okay, yeah.
I think that's the problem. I think we could get the exact wording of a verse right, and that doesn't mean that we're anywhere close to what that verse actually means, and that if we're contextually off base. I think there's too much argument in doctrine over snippets of texts, fragments of sentences, and not taking into account what is the author communicating broadly first in what we call context. And we're just getting this, though. We got these 5 words we put that were right here, and then this is where we're going to build a doctrine off of. I think
we have to have the whole Bible. That's another thing.
I think that you take any translation, any manuscript, and you look at it in full context, and most or not all the problems that people argue about, they go away in that sense. Now, we may not all agree because we don't understand, but that's a matter of understanding, and having the right wording will not fix that.
Not in all cases.
I don't think it'll fix it in almost any cases, and where it's a lack of actual understanding. The reason I don't understand, let's say, Revelation, isn't because I haven't read it in the original. It's because I don't understand Revelation. And I could read it in the original if I knew Greek, and it would not clarify it. It wouldn't be like all of a sudden, oh, that's what that always meant.
And that's the point I was trying to make earlier on. It's a spiritual book, and so we can't just rely on, I have to have it in my modern vernacular. There are other battles going on. Why aren't you? John R. Rice actually brought this point up, and he would not be considered a King James onlyist.
No.
But he brought it up. He said, look, and of course he was actually, in that particular book of his, he was actually defending the King James, even though he would not be a King James onlyist. He said, your problem isn't the old language. The problem is your heart.
Correct.
You don't want to read. You're just looking for excuse. So I thought he made a great point.
It is. I would add that it's also a problem in our even with a good heart, it doesn't mean we understand everything.
Mm-hmm. And again, I would repeat that it's one thing you're talking to a blind man and give him a Braille Bible, but that doesn't mean the Braille Bible is what everybody has to read at church. Mm-hmm. Or, you give somebody a Reader's Digest version, they can get the concepts and they could read through that, or give them a portion of John, which is not the complete Bible. Mm-hmm. And they can get started, but you're not going to just limit the church to the Gospel of John. So there would be differences in an individual.
Sure.
So where I might concede that, your version doesn't have whatever verse it is that we're fighting over, and say, okay, that's fine. But that doesn't mean I'm going to say, okay, we're going to take it out in our official version at church. So
right.
We have to get
very
those
good
concepts. Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much.